Chapter 282. After an unknown amount of time, she woke up from his coma. The narrow space in the dim light. There was a large mass of devil aura outside the cave. Fortunately, there was a layer of defense that blocked the devil aura outside. His body felt heavy. He looked down and saw Wuxia sitting motionlessly next to him. Her head was tilted and leaning against his body. Their palms were intertwined, making him feel cold and soft. His back was burning with pain. It was the wound caused by the giant eagle's tearing. But he also felt it was soft. He reached out to touch it. It turned out she put a shirt on it. What's going on? Why don't I feel like I'm hurt badly? Chenga, he called softly and pushed her. Wuxia didn't move. He had a bad feeling. He reached out to feel her pulse and was stunned. Her meridians were empty. He suddenly realized what had happened and immediately moved the spiritual aura in his body. Sure enough, his dantian and meridians were intact, and his spiritual aura was also abundant. The only difference was that there was a lot of Yin spiritual aura in the depths of his dantian, mixing with the neutral aura. After a while, she regained his composure. Almost every time he used the Yang spiritual bead, his body would become extremely weak and he would need a very long time to recover. Therefore, he rarely used the Yang spiritual bead because he didn't have complete preparations. After using it, his life would be in danger. But this time, because of her, he didn't even suffer any internal injuries. She was now in the core formation realm. Even if the spiritual aura difference between the early stage and the peak stage of the core formation realm was huge, the spiritual aura in her body was enough to heal him. Therefore, his dantian and meridians were able to recover in a short time. After sitting in a daze for a long time, he slowly recovered. The cave was very small. Sitting side by side they could barely move. In order to heal him, she almost curled up into a ball. But even if she wasn't tall and thin, it was still very difficult for her to hold such a position. He thought for a moment, laid her flat, and turned sideways to try to heal her. The wound on his back would hurt if he moved it, so he endured it. But he couldn't finish it. Although he wasn't strong, he was much taller. Not to mention sitting up, it was difficult for him to even turn around. After a long time, he could only lean forward and barely hover over her. When he was about to transfer spiritual aura to her, he suddenly realized that he looked like he was taking advantage of her. After realizing this, his face became a bit hot and he couldn't of it. Of course he couldn't do it anymore. After thinking for a while, he could only sit back and put his right palm on her Lingtai acupoint, slowly transferring spiritual aura. The best acupoints to transfer spiritual aura were the Shanzhong acupoint on the chest and the Lingtai acupoint on the back. Of the Lingtai acupoint on of her back. Of energy. The moment, the acupoint of spiritual aura acupoint of Lin of was. Of spiritual energy of Yin of Yang of the five elements. Of energy circulated of energy. Of spiritual energy. Spiritual energy of spiritual energy of energy of energy of her. Of her. However, this kind of uncontrollable flow was extremely smooth. When his Yang spiritual aura entered her body, Yin spiritual aura almost immediately gathered in her meridians. The five elements of Yin and Yang circulated endlessly. He knew her divine sense was injured, but he was powerless to do anything about it. He had never heard that divine sense could be used to heal injuries. It could only be slowly nurtured in one sea of knowledge. He shook his head, stopped transferring spiritual aura, and continued to sit side by side. But on second thought he felt this wasn't good. He took out a piece of clothing from his Chengkuan bag and put it on her back. But on second thought he felt this wasn't good, so he took out a piece of clothing from his Chengkuan bag and put it on her back. The stones around them were very hard, so it should be more comfortable. The pain on his back became more severe. He knew he had lost a lot of blood, but this place was too narrow. He couldn't even take off his clothes in such a small space, let alone treat his wound. Thinking about it, he could only give up. In any case, for cultivators, it was only a small injury and wouldn't kill them. But because he lost a lot of blood, experienced a thrilling battle, and lost a lot of spiritual aura just now, his mind couldn't help but become muddled. Soon he fell asleep again. Wuxia opened her eyes. She felt warm all over, almost making her want to stretch. But before she could do that, her head bumped into something. She screamed in pain and was about to cover her aching head when she heard a very gentle voice. "What's wrong?" Then a pair of hands wrapped around her, lifted her head, looked at her and scolded, "How could you be so careless? Do you have any self-awareness as a cultivator? You're in a daze." She didn't wake up, so of course she was in a daze. She didn't say this because she felt the current situation was very strange. In fact, she wasn't in a daze very often. Most of the time she was very sober and calm. Why did he always see her when she was in a daze? Her mind was in a mess. She shook her head to get rid of these inexplicable thoughts. Emo Chinga's eyes shifted as she recalled what happened before. They were attacked by a giant eagle on the cliff and were injured, so they stayed in this place to heal their injuries. But what's with his current attitude? Senior Martial Brother Shojing? She asked in a low voice. What? His voice sounded a bit unhappy, but his face didn't show it. Then he asked, how are your injuries? Have you recovered your spiritual aura? Spiritual aura? She immediately tried to circulate her spiritual aura, but she was stunned. She was a bit nervous when he saw her appearance. Is there a problem? Emo Chinga shook her head, still in a daze. No. Not only was there no problem, but she had never felt so good. Originally there was only a small amount of yang spiritual aura in her body, but now, it almost formed a cycle around her gold core. No matter how stupid she was, she knew what happened. She transferred her spiritual aura to him to heal his injuries, and after he recovered, he transferred it back to her. Not only was there no loss of spiritual aura, but it also triggered the spiritual aura cycle in their bodies. She suddenly understood why her master was so keen on matchmaking them. It wasn't because he wanted to be a matchmaker, but because their cultivation techniques and their spiritual aura attributes would definitely complement each other if they performed dual cultivation. However, when she realized this, she felt very unhappy. Was it just because their dual cultivation was beneficial to each other? Your dantian and meridians are fine, but what about your divine sense? Hearing his question, she felt a headache again. She supported her head with her hand and shook her head. My divine sense was injured a bit badly. She nodded. He wasn't surprised at all. He said, although the soul refining art is a good technique for winning by surprise, its shortcomings are also very fatal. You have to be careful when using it in the future. She answered softly. In the past, when she used the soul refining art, she could even defeat those stronger than her. But this time, because of the special environment in which these giant eagles grew, she was the one who was injured. Now, her body was completely fine, but the injury to her divine sense would take at least several years to recover. By the way, Senior Martial Brother, how are your injuries? He nodded and said with a smile, I'm fine. I have to thank you, it's nothing. The two of them weren't used to polite words of thanks, so they stopped talking. Emo Chinga felt like she forgot something. After thinking for a while, she suddenly remembered when she saw the bloodstains on his clothes. By the way, Senior Martial Brother, the injury on your back. She reached out, wanting to push him away from the rock wall and look at it. She struggled, but he was unwilling to move. He just smiled and said, it's nothing. How could it be nothing? Emo Chinga ignored him and continued to push him. There's so much blood and you can't handle it yourself. Don't worry, I'll be very gentle. No. Before he could finish, Emo Chinga persistently interrupted him. Senior Martial Brother. Seeing her raised eyebrows, he couldn't say anything and could only go along with her. Emo Chinga pushed him, making him sit with his back facing her. Sure enough, the wound was badly mutilated. She frowned and tried to tear the clothes on his back, but Xianqing School's clothes were spirit tools or magic tools, so it was very difficult to tear them. She had no choice but to reach out to untie his belt. This movement was very natural, so Emo Chinga didn't feel anything was wrong. Shi, on the other hand, stiffened. He felt her hand going around his waist from behind, feeling around his waist, trying to untie his belt. However, their clothes had long been tangled together, so she couldn't untie them no matter how hard she tried. After a while, she stretched her head, wanting to see what was going on, but in the next moment, her hand was pressed down. What? Before she could finish her words, she suddenly stopped. This doesn't seem right. His hand was pressing down on her. To understand the relationship between the belt and her waist, she wrapped her arms around his waist. With this press, her whole body was pressed against his back. Silence. Breathing. In this narrow space, they could only hear each other's breathing and heartbeats. The howling gales outside couldn't pass through the gap, making it seem distant and unreal. Only the two of them could be seen. Emo Chinga felt her hand was very hot. The place she pressed against his waist was very hot, and the back of her hand covered by his hand was also very hot. She felt this was wrong and wanted to pull her hand back, but his grip became tighter and tighter. Chinga? After a long time she heard Shi's voice. His voice was trembling, but it carried a water-like gentleness that she had never heard before. Her heart beat wildly. She wanted to wait for something, but she also felt she couldn't wait any longer and wanted to escape. Should I answer? She thought like this, but she couldn't even find her own voice. She finally moved. He separated her hands but didn't let go. Then, with the friction of their clothes, he gently turned around. This place was too narrow, and the places he could turn were very limited. Therefore, after he turned around, he was almost pressed against her body. Chenga felt she couldn't breathe. She struggled to step back, wanting to be a bit farther away. But in the next moment he still leaned against her. He finally let go of her hand, but he wrapped his arms around her waist. There was nowhere to retreat, a cold kiss. It happened so suddenly and so naturally. Her eyes were wide open as if she couldn't believe what had happened. Their faces were so close and their breaths were intertwined. And the cold and soft touch on her lips. It was a completely unfamiliar feeling. She must be dreaming. She must be. But her eyes opened wider and wider until she heard his helpless sigh. Then her eyes were covered. From her lips to her breath, everything became hot. Chapter 283. She must be dreaming. Maybe when she woke up, she'd find that she fell asleep cultivating in the virtual sky world. But could she fall asleep while cultivating? As a core formation cultivator, could she fall asleep while cultivating? Then it must be an illusion. It must be an illusion. She hypnotized herself for a long time, but when she opened her eyes she still saw the rock wall and that face. She wasn't dreaming. She pushed the person next to her away, ignoring the sound of him hitting the rock wall. In any case, a core formation cultivator wouldn't die even if he hit the rock wall. She picked up the things around her, wanting to throw them at him, but there was nothing around her. Where could she find anything? She put her hand into her chenkuan bag and smashed whatever she touched. Chenga. She didn't stop. She still picked up things and smashed them mindlessly. If she didn't smash them, she wouldn't be able to bear it in the next moment. Oh! A low cry of pain entered her ears. She finally stopped, gasping for breath as she stared at the person who was so close to her no matter how she pushed. Seeing that she stopped, she put down the sleeve covering his face and said helplessly, I hit my wound. Chenga calmed down and remembered the bloody and untreated wound on his back. With a cold expression she said, turn around. He paused for a moment. His clothes rubbed against each other, so he obediently turned around. Take off your clothes. Although he knew she meant he should take off his clothes to heal his wound, she still couldn't help but let his imagination run wild. He then untied his belt and took off his robe. Behind him, Chenga very rudely took off his robe and looked at his wound under the dim sky. That giant eagle's claws were very sharp, so the wound on his back was very deep. Since he hit the rock wall just now, the blood that had already coagulated started to seep out again. Chenga put her hand into her chenkuan bag, but she couldn't find what she wanted no matter how hard she searched. Remembering that she lost a lot of medicinal pill bottles, she could only lower her head and search around. With great difficulty she finally found a jade bottle. She pulled out the cork, poured the cold medicinal liquid into her palm, and directly patted it on his wound with a vengeful heart. He didn't cry out, but the muscles near the wound trembled, allowing her to enjoy the pleasure of revenge. This revenge made his mood much better. Next, he carefully cleaned his wound with medicinal liquid, sprinkled some medicinal powder, and cast a small healing spell to make the wound not look so terrible. Finally, he used a small flying sword to cut off the clothes he had taken off and used it to bandage the wound. After doing all this, Chenga once again felt something was amiss. In a narrow space with a half-naked man beside her, and not long ago, this man had done such a thing to her. So she thought for a moment and said, put on your clothes. He touched his nose, turned sideways and said innocently, you tore my clothes. Chenga was dumbfounded. She couldn't help but feel angry again. However, when she recalled his wound, she forcefully swallowed her anger and said angrily in a low voice, do you only have this one set of clothes? Of course it was impossible. They weren't mortals. If a chenkuan bag could store so many things, couldn't it store a few clothes? He had no choice but to take out his clothes from his chenkuan bag, then said, but I can't wear it with you tied up like this. Chenga glared at him. Give it to me. She took his clothes and roughly helped him put them on. His naked skin was unconsciously brushed against. At first, her heart was filled with a nameless fire. Her heart was filled with anger, but in the end, it turned into awkwardness. She had lived for more than 80 years. Among mortals, her current age would make her an old lady. However, she was a cultivator who immersed herself in cultivation and had never experienced such a thing. She recalled the past 80 years. Only when she was young did she often see boys swimming in the river by the village, but those were all children. Fortunately, this process didn't take long. She quickly put on his clothes and finally fastened the belt. "Done," she said, and was about to retreat. But in the next moment, someone grabbed her waist. She couldn't kneel anymore and fell forward, falling into his arms. She struggled to get up, but his arms tightened, making it impossible for her to struggle. He was a head taller than her, so she couldn't even struggle to free her head from his embrace. Her whole body was submerged in his embrace. Her anger, which had already faded, flared up again, so she opened her mouth and fiercely bit his chest. This kind of bite only made him groan, so she couldn't bite anymore and let go of him. The tears she originally thought would never come fell little by little. What the hell is going on? What does he want to do? He's so cold to me one moment, but he's like this the next. He's always so good that she can't help but misunderstand, but his words can make people freeze. One moment he's Qin Shi, the next moment he's Qin Shoujing. She clearly recognized him as Qin Shoujing and buried her feelings for Qin Shi in the depths of her heart. But as Qin Shoujing, Qin Shoujing, what do you want? She wiped away her tears little by little and asked calmly, "Didn't you say you don't covet anything from me? What are you doing now?" He was silent for a long time, but he didn't let go of her. After a while he said slowly, I want to ask you, what do you mean by that?" He clasped her waist and lifted her up, not allowing her to escape even for a moment. "Am I Qin Shi or Qin Shoujing? What's the difference in meaning? Why don't you say it?" he asked. "I ended my closed-door meditation for you, went out to find medicine for you, and in the end I almost lost half my life. Why do you say that to me?" Not answering? He pressed his lips against hers and bit her, bit by bit, as if he was kissing and biting. Then he shouted between her teeth, "What do I want? Why don't you ask me what you want?" This time he didn't let her answer. Her waist was tightly held by him, and it wasn't a gentle kiss like before. Instead, it was close to biting and devouring. He never knew he was such a violent person, but at this moment, his heart was filled with the desire to destroy her. He didn't want her to escape, didn't want her to say those hurtful words, and didn't want to see her distant eyes. He trapped her by his side, making her unable to move and unable to hurt him with her seemingly unintentional but indifferent eyes. Normally, the sex robes couldn't be torn, but she didn't know what kind of technique he used, but it was almost completely torn. In this narrow space she couldn't even struggle, let alone he was holding her waist so hard and wrapping her wrists. His ice-cold hands went under the hem of the robe, slid all the way and finally grasped her smooth skin, bringing her uneasy pain. But she couldn't say anything. His kiss never stopped. Their breathing was messy. The narrow space brought about a cramped depression. The sudden passion burned them like fire and drowned them like water. Emo Chinga struggled to float up from the water. Although this kind of feeling was intoxicating, she instinctively felt that she should stop. Because of that, she finally managed to free her hand and ruthlessly swung it, hitting his face with a paw. There was silence. "Let me go," she said in a suppressed voice. Qin Shi was silent for a long time, but in the end he let go. "I'm sorry." His apology made Emo Chinga unable to restrain herself. She suddenly grabbed his collar and tightly restrained him. "What are you sorry for? What do you think you have to apologize for?" "I apologize for my behavior." His voice finally regained its calmness, but then he said, "But what I said wasn't false. I don't need to apologize for it." He continued, "I really don't understand what kind of woman you are. You're usually like a man and refuse to admit defeat, but you're timid in the face of love. You're always doing hurtful things and saying hurtful things. I also don't know what kind of man you are. One moment you say this and the next moment you do that." His words ignited her anger, and Emo Chinga almost couldn't control her temper. "You said you did it for me? But for more than 30 years, you avoided me and never thought about confessing your identity to me. Even if I knew, you didn't give me any explanation. Yes, I knew you were Qin Shoujing and I didn't care about deceiving you, but you didn't say anything. Did you think it was natural? Did you think you didn't need to explain it all?" Don't say it." She shouted, pushed him back and continued to grab onto his collar. "Back then you clearly knew that I had feelings for senior brother Qin, so you kept your distance. I'm not an idiot, so I didn't have any delusions either. I'm also a cultivator and I also want to walk the great Tao of immortality. I can control and endure feelings, but you're always changing. When you're good, you treat me very well, but after a while, you avoid me. During the demonic beast riot, you came to save me. Do you know how touched I was? I think you have a little bit of feelings for me, don't you? Can I look forward to it? But as soon as we came out, you treated me like that. Yes, I know my cultivation level is much lower than yours and I'm just a small cultivator to you. I'm not even worth a glance from you. But if you look down on me, why are you so considerate, so gentle? She lowered her head, controlling her trembling lips so that he wouldn't see it. I guessed you were Qin Shoujing. I know I'm being paranoid, but I also know that if you had any bad intentions, you didn't have to treat me like that. So I told myself maybe you had your reasons. Since you didn't say anything, I would still treat you as senior martial brother Qin and treat you like before. But in the end, after the demonic beast riot ended, I came back alive. It was so difficult to see you again, but you pretended you didn't see me. You looked down on me. I didn't look down on you. I never said, but your attitude was like that. She shouted at him in an even louder voice. You watched me walk towards you, but you didn't even look at me. You just turned around and walked away. Yes, my cultivation level is very low. Is it very shameful for me to become your junior martial sister? But in the beginning, you were the one who made Master accept me as a disciple. No, don't deny it. She said loudly, even somewhat hysterically. At that time I understood. You're not senior martial brother Qin. You're Qin Shoujing. I'm indebted to you, but you're separated from me by tens of thousands of mountains and rivers. You're a high and aloof, senior. You said I hurt you? Qin Shoujing, Taoist Master Shoujing, Senior Martial Brother Shoujing, on what basis do you think you can turn around and walk away when you don't like me? But after you've done what you want, you can turn around and look at me? I'd like to ask you, what do you think I am? One moment you're cold and heartless, the next you're filled with tenderness. At that time you turned around and walked away, avoiding me for 35 years. What do you want me to think? I don't want to think I'm sentimental anymore. Chapter 284. It was just a turn of his back, but it turned out that it hurt her so much. He never thought about it. Perhaps even she herself never thought about it. She was Qin Shoujing. When she realized this, she tried to accept it, but he used an indifferent attitude to reject her approach. Therefore, she firmly believed that Qin Shoujing wasn't Qin Shi. But this inference was completely wrong. Why did he do that back then? Because he had a little bit of a good impression of her, but his self-esteem was hurt by those two deification cultivators. He rejected her approach because his pointless self-esteem was hurt, and also because, at that time he didn't have that many feelings for her. That's because, this time she gave him time but he couldn't say it. Because at that time, they didn't have such deep feelings for each other? Even if this was the truth, if he said it out loud, there really wouldn't be any hope left. Apart from this, what else could he say? He wasn't a liar, and he definitely wasn't a person who spoke sweet words. He was clumsy with his words, and the words he said were always true. He only did something like deceiving someone once, and it was only that one time. Now he already paid the price for it. For a long time, Qin Shi didn't answer, so her expression gradually turned into a sneer. Can't say it? He turned his head, not knowing how to face her gaze. You're always like this. You give me the wrong impression, then back away, leaving me to struggle in the whirlpool alone. When I climb up, you want to pull me down again. I've formed my gold core, so I'm indifferent to it. If you ignore me, my feelings will probably slowly die. But why do you still have to provoke me? Qin Shoujing, you just know I love you. When she shouted these words, even she herself didn't realize how wrong she was. In this life, she lost too many things, so she wasn't afraid to lose them. However, she hated this feeling of not being able to have them and not being able to let them go. When she formed her gold core, she calmly dealt with this feeling. If it weren't for his faintly discernible teasing during this period of time, maybe after a few more years, this feeling would have really disappeared. But he didn't let her go. Along the way he seemed to be both affectionate and heartless. One moment he was too nice to her, and the next moment he was cold. He didn't seduce her as openly as Jing Xingji did. If he did, perhaps her remaining feelings for him would have disappeared without a trace. He just stood at a distance that seemed to be far yet close at the same time. She couldn't get close to him, couldn't leave him, and couldn't bear to part with him. Can't say it? Mo Chenga calmed down and stopped him just as he was about to speak. The emotions that had been accumulating for several decades were vented out, but there was no response. She raised her head and looked at him with a bit of arrogance. Then there's no need to say anything else. I've reached the core formation realm, and I'll continue on my path to the nascent soul realm. Today's matter ends here. I don't want to hear any more excuses. Please keep your distance from me. No. How could he stop now? Especially after what she said. Chenga, she couldn't retreat any further, so she could only turn her back to him. If she couldn't see his face, perhaps she wouldn't be soft-hearted anymore. But his arms wrapped around her from behind. The gap was so narrow that she couldn't break free at all. His breath was right next to her ear, carrying uncontrollable excitement. How can I keep my distance from you? You said you loved me, so what? She sneered. Didn't you already know? I didn't know. He forcibly turned her body around. I knew you had a good impression of the former senior martial brother Qin, but I didn't know how deep your feelings were. I thought. He was so excited that he was a bit incoherent. Since you can form your gold core, you're definitely no longer, at least not that much. After saying a bunch of nonsense, he became serious again and asked seriously, why can you form your gold core? Emo Chenga was stunned. She was furious. What do you mean, why can I form my gold core? Are you going to be happy if I can't form my gold core? Of course not. She was so anxious that he didn't know what to say. But, I can't form my nascent soul. I thought of a lot of methods. Medicinal pills, mental cultivation, even letting Master use a secret technique to enter my sea of knowledge, but I always failed on the verge of success. It doesn't make sense that you can. What does it have to do with me that you can't form your nascent soul? She became even angrier. Let go. No. I'd be an idiot if I still let go after you said so. Master will definitely beat me to death if he finds out. Wait a minute. He calmed down a bit. Let me think about what to say. No matter how he thought about it, he still didn't know what to say. Therefore in the end, she gave up. Forget it. I'll start from the beginning. From now on you're not allowed to speak. Why should I? Mo Chenga angrily opened her mouth to bite him, but she didn't give her a chance. He clasped her chin and bit her tongue to stop her from speaking. After a long time he finally ended this entanglement. Her breathing was unstable. She finally managed to catch her breath. He stopped her between her teeth. I told you from now on you're not allowed to speak. If you want to speak, then neither of us needs to say anything. Mo Chenga felt something was wrong. Why did it seem like she was being led by the nose by him? But if she didn't listen to him, it seemed like she couldn't. Seeing her confused expression, she couldn't help but laugh. He combed her messy long hair and said softly, "Listen to me, okay?" She hesitated for a while but eventually acquiesced. It seemed she had no choice but to acquiesce. I admit in the beginning I didn't have any feelings for you. I just thought it was good to be Qin and get along with you. At that time if I became Qin Shoujing again, you'd definitely stay away from me. Besides, you're so paranoid. If it was Qin Shoujing who saved you, would you still be so close to me? Mo Chenga didn't answer, but he got the answer from her expression. She smiled. You seem to always be afraid of power that surpasses your own. Maybe it's because it makes you feel unsafe. I can understand that guarding that kind of secret requires you to be careful in every aspect, but this kind of vigilance will make you reject all kinds of power you can't control. If I were Qin Shoujing, you definitely wouldn't trust me. Even if I saved you and took you back to Shenqing School, it would still be very difficult for you to have a sense of belonging to Shenqing School, right? Mo Chenga really wanted to refute him, but what he said seemed to be right. The first person she trusted was senior martial brother Qin, so when she came to Shenqing School, she slowly accepted this kind of life and found it wasn't that hard to trust the people around her. Even though she was disappointed in senior martial brother Qin later, Luo Fengxue Yi Jingguan, martial uncle Shenin, her master. These people made her feel that trust wasn't that scary. Senior martial brother Qin wasn't the whole reason, but he was the first reason. Of course it was because I also liked this kind of feeling. I felt that in front of you, being a little cultivator in the same realm as me was much easier. I could say some things and do some things without any scruples. At that time she really felt that he was sincere and frank. He didn't hide anything, was frank, fair and clean, but then there was the demonic beast riot, she said. I don't know how to explain this matter to you, but I can tell you that I wasn't in a good mood at that time because I wasn't targeting you. He wasn't targeting me, but he still had that dead face? Mo Chenga said angrily, hey. I told you. You're not allowed to talk about it now. Mo Chenga shut her mouth even more angrily. Maybe you don't know something happened. He took a deep breath. For the first time he planned to tell her about this matter. Did you notice that I was seriously injured when I came out of the 2 Deification Seniors virtual sky world? Mo Chenga thought about it and nodded. Although he didn't say it explicitly, she could see it with her eyes. Qin she smiled, somewhat self-deprecatingly. In fact, it was because inside the virtual sky world, that Senior Yuan Bao said I had a yang spiritual bead and was suitable to practice his cultivation technique, so he tortured me. Faced with Mo Chenga's questioning gaze, he had no choice but to tell her the truth. He made me eat a lot of strange things and used a lot of inexplicable methods, almost torturing me until I was half dead. It was precisely because of this that I was seriously injured. He said it was to transform my body, to make me infinitely close to a pure yang constitution so I could become your human furnace. By the end he was almost silent. Mo Chenga widened her eyes and finally spoke. Human furnace? His face turned slightly red and he looked away. He said, although I wasn't born with a pure yang constitution, I have metal and fire spiritual roots, both of which are of the yang attribute. I also fused with the yang spiritual bead. After his transformation, as long as I slowly cultivate his pure yang technique, I'll become the same as a pure yang constitution. In that case, being your human furnace can help you cultivate faster. Mo Chenga kept staring at him, almost not daring to believe what she heard. Human furnace? She had always been afraid that she would be forced to become a human furnace because of her constitution. In the end, he was also afraid to become her human furnace? What was this? He felt very uncomfortable under her gaze. I admit, Senior Yuan Bao's words were too much of a blow to me, so as soon as I came out, I was in a hurry to go back to heal my injuries and enter closed-door meditation so I could advance to the nascent soul realm as soon as possible. Because of this, I also vented my anger on you. Mo Chenga was speechless for a long time. She originally thought she would still feel angry no matter what reason he gave, but this reason was too ridiculous. It was so ridiculous that she couldn't even speak and didn't even have the strength to get angry. Chenga, he said nervously, are you laughing at me? After being silent for a long time, she nodded expressionlessly. Yes, I'm laughing at you. Sure enough. He sighed and laughed at himself. I know it's ridiculous, but I don't think you understand how humiliating this is for me. I don't understand, she said. In the next moment she grabbed his collar and gnashed her teeth. But I know you've been deceived. Chapter 285. Qin she was dumbfounded and grabbed her hand. What do you mean I was deceived? Mo Chenga sneered. Two disrespectful old men. When they left they didn't want to see me again. What human furnace are you talking about? How is that possible? If those two old men weren't going to come back, it was impossible for them to capture him as a human furnace for Mo Chenga. Qin she was completely petrified when he realized this. What was he doing all these years? Are you sure? He was doubtful. They really weren't going to come back? I'm sure, absolutely sure. Mo Chenga said angrily, at that time I just built my foundation. Deification cultivators like them can casually enter closed-door meditation for thousands of years. Who knows if I'll still be alive when they come back? Only an idiot like you would believe that. Qin she thought about it and felt something was wrong. But, if that's the case, why did they have to transform my body? Mo Chenga continued to sneer. They're deification cultivators. Can't they play with little cultivators because they're bored? How dare you say I'm paranoid? They gave you benefits and deceived you. Fine, he was successfully deceived. Moreover, he was deceived for dozens of years and suffered for dozens of years. If those two old men knew this, they'd definitely be very proud. After thousands of years in the deification realm, did they go crazy from boredom? They obviously gave him benefits, but they acted like they were scheming against him. They didn't want his gratitude but wanted to make him feel disgusted. He wasted dozens of years on this kind of thing. What on earth was he doing? After figuring this out, both of them were silent. One was speechless and the other was gnashing her teeth. After a long time she heard Qin shi's voice. Chenga. What? She asked fiercely. You cough. You what? You don't know how to say something? Qin shi didn't say anything. Instead, he reached out to grab a casually thrown underwear, put it on her and carefully wrapped it up. At first, Mo Chenga didn't know what he was doing, but as she watched his movements she suddenly realized that her clothes were disheveled. The front of her robe was torn and her undergarments were faintly discernible. She immediately swatted his hand away, then wrapped herself up and curled up into a ball. He didn't know if this feeling was called wanting more, but he was sure he was very disappointed. If he knew this, he wouldn't have reminded her. What are you looking at? He smiled as he leaned closer and whispered, You're blushing. Mo Chenga was stunned. She grabbed her robe with one hand and randomly fumbled for something with her other hand before throwing it at him again. Tienga. Even if he was a cultivator and couldn't smash people to death, but she was too violent. Why didn't he realize she was such a person in the past? She couldn't bear it anymore. He grabbed her hands and firmly pressed her against his chest. Don't move. Do you want to smash me to death? I'd rather smash you to death. Tienga struggled. If you think it's too troublesome, then die for me to see. You? This was simply unreasonable. Me what? Qin Shoujing, let go of me. You've gone too far today. Fine, it was a little too much, but if he hadn't confirmed her feelings he wouldn't have. Are you going to let go or not? Unable to break free, she became more and more angry and pushed him away. She did manage to push him away, but he was pushed to the rock wall by her. He immediately let out a muffled groan and froze. She struggled out of his embrace. Seeing his sweaty appearance, she couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong?" After a long time he finally showed a bleak smile. He wanted to raise his hand but couldn't, so he could only frown and say, "My back." His back was injured. Thinking of this, Tienga felt a bit regretful, but it was already too late. She could only ask, "Can you move?" He shook his head. "Wait a minute." He waited for a while with cold sweat all over his body. When the pain seemed to have subsided a bit, he finally moved his body and turned his back. Tienga's heart trembled when she saw the back of his newly changed robe was bloody again. She then looked at the rock wall, which was also stained with a lot of blood. It was obvious that her push just now had caused his wound to split open. "Take off your clothes," she said after a while. She obediently went to untie his belt, but his hands trembled for a long time and still couldn't lift them. He could only look at her helplessly and say, "It hurts too much. Even moving my hand hurts." After pausing for a while, Tienga moved forward and lowered her head to untie his belt. This time it was much smoother, but it was even more embarrassing. At that time she only thought about treating his injury and didn't think about anything else. Now she kissed him and hugged him. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at his face. She only breathed a sigh of relief when she took off his clothes and didn't worry that he would see her face. Then she concentrated on treating his wound again. She untied his belt and sure enough, his wound ruptured. She treated it as before and continued to help him change his clothes. During the whole process she kept her head down and didn't say a word. When everything was done, she pretended that nothing had happened and started to clean up the medicine bottles she threw everywhere in the cave. Ahem. He was restless and wanted to attract her attention. "What are you doing? If you still want your injury to get better, behave." "I didn't." He said 2 words and then pulled her hand in a flattering manner. "I haven't finished talking yet. What else do you want to say?" He didn't know where to start since he was interrupted. He hesitated for a long time and finally said, "In short, those 35 years. I just couldn't figure it out, so, later on you finally came back and entered the 10,000 laws of nature formation, but in the end you injured your sea of consciousness. Only then did I realize that no matter what those 2 soul formation seniors said, my feelings for you always existed." "Feelings?" Tienga looked at him suspiciously. "Do you have feelings for me? Why would you suspect that I don't have feelings for you?" She was startled and asked back. "How would I know you have feelings for me?" Tienga was even more baffled. "Did you tell me? Did I?" "Fine, no. But I've made it very obvious, okay?" "Obvious? Where?" "I ended my closed-door meditation because I sensed something happened to you. Then, in order to wake you up quickly, I went out to look for medicine. I also brought you to Demonic Mountain. If it was someone else, I wouldn't have cared." "What's with that expression?" "The expression that says you're an idiot." Tienga couldn't stand it anymore. Regardless of whether his wound was just bandaged or not, she slapped his hand away. "Yes, the things you do always make me feel like you have feelings for me. But just as I thought that, you looked at me coldly and hinted that I shouldn't think too highly of myself." She was tongue-tied. "I didn't mean that." Tienga continued to sneer. "I don't care whether you did or not. That's what you meant." She still hadn't calmed down. She was being unreasonable. He took a deep breath and said, "Fine, I'll tell you now. You misunderstood me. I actually think about you every day. I think about you even in my dreams. I miss you so much that I'm crazy. Do you understand now?" "What do you mean by not saying anything?" She was anxious. He had never said this kind of thing in his life, and he didn't plan to say it again. "Are you going back on your words again?" "What do you mean again?" Emo Chenga finally spoke. Aren't you? Qin, she said with some confusion. In the beginning, I indeed sensed that you had developed different feelings for me. But at that time, I thought you were a smart person who knew how to control yourself, so I didn't say anything. Later, I figured it out and came out of closed-door meditation, but you coldly turned around and left. Master told me you needed time to accept it, so I didn't disturb you and just thought of a way to form my nascent soul. But more than 10 years passed and you still didn't look for me. Right after that, you formed your gold core. If you really had feelings for me, why could you form your gold core? Say something. Emo Chenga resisted the urge to slap him again. She clenched her teeth and said, why couldn't I form my gold core? If you didn't say anything, how would I know you really did it for me? Maybe it was just because my father entrusted you to go out and look for medicine for me, but you just didn't expect the consequences to be so serious. Qin, she was speechless. He didn't say anything because he thought his actions were enough to make her understand. Unfortunately, she was afraid of misunderstanding and didn't dare to think highly of herself, so she never understood. After a long time, he continued to ask, what about you? What were you thinking? What could I think? If you didn't want it, I didn't dare to force you. You wholeheartedly wanted to form your nascent soul, so why should I be so stubborn? I couldn't form my nascent soul because of you, but you didn't dare to force me? Qin, she couldn't help but question her. How would I know? Emo Chenga lowered her head. Although she didn't want to admit defeat, her tone was weak. You never told me either. Qin, she said, you even called me an idiot. You're not that smart. If you didn't refuse to say anything, I would have thought you already had no feelings for me. You said I didn't say anything, but not only did you say nothing, but you also didn't ask anything. Emo Chenga's anger flared again, but he was injured, so she could only turn her anger into words. Why do I have to say everything and ask everything? You're a fickle and messy person, yet you still want me to understand everything? I'm not so smart that I can see what's going on in your head. You're unreasonable. You're the unreasonable one. The two of them glared at each other. In any case, they both thought the other was wrong. After glaring at her for a while, Qin, she was the first to give in. He gently pulled her sleeve and said softly, fine, if you say so, then so be it. Do you understand now? He smiled fawningly and moved forward to hug her, but he was slapped away. Then he unyieldingly pulled her arm again. I'm an idiot and you're an idiot with me. In short, we're two idiots. Isn't this fair? Oh, if you don't say anything, I'll take it that you're not angry anymore. I'm not an idiot. Fine, you're not. But we've wasted a lot of time. From now on, let's not waste any more, okay? If you don't say anything, I'll take it that you agree. I didn't. He swallowed the rest of his words, so he smiled cheerfully. You really agreed. Chapter 286. After being forced to agree, Emo Chenga found that the person who was half dead a moment ago was suddenly full of vigor. This cave was so narrow that they couldn't even lie down, so he took out his flying sword and cut a large piece of the rock wall, at least enough for the two of them to lie down. Emo Chenga was dumbfounded. Qin, she put the stone he cut into his chenkuan bag and noticed her gaze. What's wrong? So these stones can be cut. He touched his nose and avoided her gaze. Although the material is quite special, my sword isn't an ordinary sword. Then why didn't you do it yesterday? The two of them squeezed in such a small place and couldn't move, so he took advantage of her a lot. It wasn't necessary. Qin, she looked innocent. I just wanted to rest for a while. Was there a need to open an immortal's cave? Both of us are injured now, so we have to rest here for a few days. That's why I wanted to make it more comfortable. Emo Chenga swallowed her anger. You swear you didn't do it on purpose? Of course not, he said righteously. Think about it. Back then your father and I, two men, didn't waste our strength even when we were squeezed in here. These stones in Demonic Mountain aren't ordinary things. Look, I cut them and even wanted to take them out. These can at least be used to refine tools. Why did she feel like something was wrong? She felt like she was being fooled. All right, don't think too much, Qin, she said. Quickly put your things away. You have to change your habit of smashing people. Perhaps she had been repressed for too long? If she wanted to vent her emotions, she could just slap him, but why did she like smashing people? You really have a lot of demands. I'm doing it for my own safety. She changed her words halfway. You really have a lot of medicinal pills? Most of the things he picked up were jade bottles. He opened them and smelled them. They were all medicinal pills. However, he felt something was wrong. The quality of these medicinal pills was too good. Even with his pill concocting skills, he didn't think he could concoct them. He remembered the medicinal pill he got from Yi Jinji and gave to Xiaohua. Just as he thought about it, the medicinal pill in his hand was immediately taken away by Mo Tienga. She plugged the bottle and put it into her Chengkuan bag. She didn't say, so he didn't ask. It was impossible for the two of them to have no secrets. Besides, they weren't in that kind of relationship yet. Silently, he collected his things. After a while, Mo Tienga was the first to break the silence. She suddenly asked, "Why did your attitude suddenly change today? Didn't you say that you don't think I have feelings for you anymore?" Upon hearing this, she just smiled. Mo Tienga's curiosity was piqued by his smile. She couldn't help but glare at him. "Speak. It's not like I can't tell you." He held back his laughter. Mo Tienga couldn't bear it anymore. She pounced on him and pinched him. "Don't keep me guessing. Tell me." All right, I'll tell you." Hugging her, he laughed and said, You definitely don't know that you talk in your sleep." Mo Tienga was stunned. "Sleep talking?" "Yes." "Sleep talking?" Cultivators rarely slept, and when they occasionally fell asleep, no one would be by their side, so she didn't know about it at all. Thinking of this, she was a little nervous. "What did I say?" She was still smiling with his lips pursed. He lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers, but he said, "I won't talk about this." But he clearly knew what he said, but he didn't tell her. This kind of feeling was too uncomfortable. Did he say something very mushy? "I won't talk." He looked determined not to talk. "Are you going to talk or not?" "If I won't talk, I won't talk." "But ahem, if you throw yourself into my arms now, I can think about it." After a moment of silence, things began to fly in the small cave again. "Go to hell." After tossing and turning for a long time, she still couldn't pry his mouth open. All the things were thrown away and his wound opened again. With no other choice, she stopped to bandage his wound again. The two of them continued to squat down and pick up things. Suddenly, she was stunned. He picked up a stone the size of a child's fist. It was obviously a piece of ore. It was white in color, but there were many natural cracks on it. It looked no different from ordinary stones. He looked at it for a while, then suddenly opened his right hand. Flames appeared in his palm and surrounded the whole ore. "What are you doing?" Mo Tienga was startled. She shook his head and didn't speak. He just focused on the ore in his palm. After a while, this ore finally changed. The cracks on it turned into clouds. Mo Tienga's expression changed. She put away the flames in his palm and handed the ore to her. "Chiyun stone. Where did you get it?" "Chiyun stone?" Mo Tienga took it and was completely dumbfounded. "This is Chiyun stone." "Yes, I shouldn't be mistaken." She was also a bit surprised. "We've been looking for it for so long, but we didn't find it. Where did this come from?" "This is..." Mo Tienga scratched her head. This was what they got from Ziwei's Immortal's cave after they divided the loot with Taoist Fangjing. It was actually the Chiyun stone that they'd only heard about but never seen. In that case, didn't she have a chance to get her natal magic weapon? Chiyun stone was found, and 1,000-year-old chalcedony wasn't too rare. As long as they found heavenly aromatic beans on Demonic Mountain, they could exchange them for chalcedony. "I got this the last time I went out to travel." She slowly told him about Ziwei's Immortal's cave, including how Wanderer Ziwei left a mark in her and Taoist Fangjing's Sea of Consciousness, and how he asked them to find Xiao Xilan's remains and bury them together with him within 200 years. She didn't take this matter too seriously because she still wasn't strong enough. For now, she still couldn't accomplish what Wanderer Ziwei entrusted to her. Shi's expression turned solemn. "So you're saying that there's a mark in your brain that will flare up in 200 years? Mo Tienga thought for a moment, then said, "It's been 49 years, so it should be 151 years later." He nodded but didn't say anything. He just lowered his head in contemplation. Mo Tienga played with the Chiyun stone in her hand and said, "There's still 151 years left. Even if I can't form my nascent soul, I can at least reach the late stage of the core formation realm, right? I'll have more assurance when I go there." She shook his head, took her hand and said, "Having a mark in your brain isn't a good thing. When we go back, we'll let Master see if he can remove it. If he can't, we'll have to think of a way to complete what he entrusted me with." "I know what I'm doing." It was clear that he was rejecting him. She was silent for a long time before he sighed and said to her, "Tienga, can you not treat me as an outsider?" "I don't." If he was an outsider, she wouldn't have said this kind of thing. Then why? He paused, trying to find a suitable way to say it. "I think you don't trust me too much. You always want to make your own decisions and aren't willing to listen to me. Chenga was stunned. She withdrew her hand, turned around, and silently sorted out the other things she threw in the cave. After she put everything into her Chenkuan bag, she said, Maybe you haven't realized it, but you like to take the initiative too much. When I'm by your side, I almost don't need my own thoughts. I just need to follow you. She was a bit stunned. He really hadn't realized it. After thinking for a while, he said, Is there anything wrong with that? There are some things you don't understand, but the things I know. Before he could finish, he was interrupted by Chenga's chuckle. This chuckle definitely wasn't the relaxed kind of chuckle. It carried a bit of helplessness and worry. She nodded and said, You're right. This isn't a problem. If we were just companions, I'd think you'd be the best companion. However, this isn't the only time. The most fundamental problem between us is that your cultivation level is much higher than mine, and your experience is also much richer than mine. I still have to learn how to deal with some things, but you've already passed that stage. But have you ever thought about it? If I stay with you like this, will I still need to grow in the future? You'll be in charge of everything, but what about me? I'll be fine as long as I follow you. Isn't it like being a human furnace? He was dumbfounded for a moment before he said, Even if you stay with me, you can still grow. If you encounter a lot of things, you'll naturally know what to do. It's not that I can't, but that I don't need to, she said quietly. Do you think I just don't want to ask? I don't dare. No matter what your answer is, I don't dare. Just like now. You said you have me in your heart, and I'm very happy, but even so, what should I do in the future? If we stay together, it won't just be a matter of feelings. His expression gradually darkened. After a long time, he said softly, Could it be that you want to leave me because of this? Silence spread in the cave. Chenga lowered her head and didn't say anything. Her attitude made him more and more restless. He grabbed her wrist, then whispered, Then what do you want? After what you said, do you still want me to let go? Chenga shook her head softly. No. Let me think about it. I still don't know what to do now. Let me think clearly. Although she didn't directly refuse, he was disappointed. This represented a certain possibility, the possibility he was most afraid of. The most frightening thing wasn't losing something, but losing it after obtaining it. He remembered the story she told him just now. Wanderer Ziwei. Although he didn't personally experience it, he understood why this senior from several thousand years ago still lingered and refused to leave even after he passed away in meditation for several thousand years. Because he obtained it, lost it, and couldn't see it for the rest of his life, so he couldn't forget it until he died. If he didn't know her feelings just now, if he never obtained it and didn't know what it felt like to be in love with each other, maybe he would also slowly lose interest and walk on the road to becoming an immortal. But, it's impossible, he said softly. Don't do this kind of thing. I haven't, but you think so? He suddenly raised his voice and stared at her with a gloomy gaze. Then what do you want me to do? Chenga also raised her voice. I can't do nothing. So what if you just stay by my side? Can't I protect you? Why do you have to rely on yourself? We're like this. I can help you and you can continue to cultivate. Forming your nascent soul or even deification isn't impossible. Chenga didn't say anything. She raised her head and looked at him as if he was a stranger, saying nothing. This kind of silence made him angry, but it also made him more restless. After a long time, he reached out and gently pulled her sleeve. Chenga, say something. Okay. She finally smiled, but it was a cold, unsmiling smile. This kind of smile scared him. She said, You really don't understand anything. Chapter 287. The sudden quarrel made the two of them feel suffocated, especially since they had no experience in quarreling with others. This kind of sulking feeling was too uncomfortable. Unfortunately, the space in this small cave was so big that they could occupy one end of it. They couldn't even find something to do even if they wanted to. Before long, she regretted it. Why did he waste so much effort to expand the cave just now? If it was still the same as before, he just needed to be thick-skinned and endure it and it might be fine. But now he couldn't endure it and he couldn't put down his pride. He had never done this kind of thing and he didn't know how to get along with women. He just felt that she was sometimes like this, sometimes like that, and didn't listen to anything he said. He really didn't know what to do. But he didn't think he was wrong. There were many dual cultivation partners in this world. How could every pair of dual cultivation partners be equal in strength? There was always a front and a back. What was wrong with relying on one's partner? As he thought of this, he forgot that his self-esteem had been shattered into pieces by the word human furnace, and could not recover for dozens of years. Emo Chinga kept her back to him and calmly tidied up the medicine bottles. He didn't know how she got so many things to tidy up, but she kept tidying up one after another. Until devil aura floated in from outside and blocked the entrance of the light. "I'm sorry." She was stunned. Emo Chinga coughed. Relying on the darkness and her back to him, she plucked up her courage. "I know you mean well, but some things aren't that simple. Maybe you don't think it's a big deal, but it's very important to me." Even after a long time there was no response. She couldn't help but feel annoyed. She wasn't good at quarreling and she felt even more unhappy. Thus, she carried this annoyance into her words. "Of course, if you think all your ideas are right and do everything you say, then I have nothing to say." There was the sound of wind behind her. Just as she was about to turn around, she was hugged from behind. "I'm sorry." His voice was low, but it was very clear. It was only 3 words, but she felt all her previous anger disappear. The two of them hugged each other like this. "I know I was too impulsive just now. I shouldn't have given you time to think," he said. "There's no need for that." She pulled his hand away and turned around. Looking into his eyes in the dark, she said seriously, "I apologize for my attitude just now. I was also very impulsive. However, we still have to make things clear. Do you agree?" "Yes." Emo Chinga thought for a long time, but she didn't know where to start, so she might as well start from the beginning. "I was born in the secular world. Although I'm just an ordinary village girl, I inherited my mother's surname and my clan's seniority. From the very beginning, my mother raised me like a boy. When I was little, I wanted to study like those boys and I wanted to read better than them. Mother always said that my father said that no matter if it was a man or a woman, his children should be brought up well. So she would give me whatever she could, and I would do my best to do what I could. Later on, mother passed away and I set foot on the path of cultivation. I went to Kunwu and met second uncle. Second uncle said that perhaps other female cultivators can slack off, but I can't. My physique is both a capital and a life-threatening talisman. Therefore, not only do I have to be more outstanding than female cultivators, but I also have to work harder than most male cultivators. After talking for a long time like this, she almost forgot what she wanted to say. There were some things she rarely recalled because every time she did, there was only one person. But now, there was someone listening, so she couldn't help but talk about those 10-odd years, about the joys and sorrows she experienced with second uncle. I've already become accustomed to this kind of life, and this has also become my own belief. It's not that I don't trust you or don't want to listen to you, but this goes against my belief for so many years. Second uncle said that being sentimental and weak are the archenemies of female cultivators, so he always asked me to be independent and to not rely on anyone, even if one day I find someone who can accompany me. She raised her head and met his gaze. If I really don't have to do anything in the future, it would be tantamount to denying my previous life of more than 80 years. The devil aura floated away, illuminating the cave. She didn't say anything for a long time, but he also didn't let go of her. These memories reminded him of the 3 years he spent in Yunwu sect. During those 3 years he was indifferent at first, then he discovered her secret and in the end he was very interested. When he first learned about her secret he was a bit confused because she was different from those women he looked down on. Then he thought maybe she was the kind of woman he admired like Martial Uncle Miaoi or Senior Martial Sister Sushin. Later he thought she was tenacious and hard-working. If a cultivator had such qualities, they could achieve great things if they had enough fated chances and luck. In the next few decades he watched her grow step by step. In the past he thought it was really good that she had such a strong character. These were all qualities he admired. At least she wouldn't turn into a woman he hated. But now that their relationship was different, he felt that it was not the case. So what if she relied on him? If he couldn't bring her anything, what was the point of being with him? He felt very confused, so he said the same thing. Emo Chinga's eyes widened. She turned around and glared at him. "Do you think bringing me something is meaningful to me?" She also widened his eyes. "Isn't that the case?" Emo Chinga was speechless. Only now did she realize there was a problem with their communication. "What's wrong? Tell me." She thought for a moment, then asked, "What if we switched places?" He didn't understand what she meant. She said again, "What if our genders were switched and you were a woman?" This assumption made Chi's face darken. "Do I look like a woman?" Emo Chinga slapped his hand away, leaned against the rock wall, and looked at him with her arms crossed. "In fact, you don't think highly of women, do you?" Although he knew it was better to deny it, he still chose to admit it. Then do you look down on me? Of course not. He hurriedly explained, if I looked down on you, I wouldn't have contacted you in Yunwu's sect. I already knew you were a woman, but, seeing his expression, Mo Chinga smiled. Why are you so anxious? I didn't say anything about you. He sighed, feeling like he couldn't explain himself. Mo Chinga looked at him and said, you see, you actually have a certain degree of prejudice against women because some people don't want to make progress. If I were like those women who don't want to make progress, would you still look at me differently? No. Then that's it, she said briskly. Isn't the reason why you look at me differently because of my personality? If we get together and I rely on you in the future after a long time, maybe you'll think I'm very annoying. How could that be possible? He denied instinctively, but he couldn't give a reason. No need for this and that. I'm not making things difficult for you. Mo Chinga pressed his hand and said earnestly, in fact, I only discovered another side of you after coming out this time. What? He was a bit nervous. Let's assume. She carefully chose her words. If I get together with you, you'll take care of everything, right? What's wrong with that? She didn't answer and continued to say, you'll do everything, you'll shoulder all the responsibilities and you'll solve all the problems. Will that be the case? He couldn't answer. She didn't need to hear his answer. Just by looking at his guilty expression, Mo Chinga already knew his answer. I'm not saying it's bad for you to be like this. She said, from a mortal's point of view, you're a responsible person. You'll do things for the person you like rather than instructing others to do things. Just like those villagers in Mo family's village who always let their wives run circles around them, Mo Chinga was just like those villagers in Mo family's village. But we're cultivators. I'm not a mortal woman. If I follow you like this, I won't have a sense of existence. After saying that, she didn't know what to say, so she asked, do you understand? She was still silent. No one knew what he was thinking. It wasn't until a long time later that he said, I probably understand what you mean. You want to say that me being like this will turn you into the kind of woman who does nothing but rely on others? Just like Martial Uncle Miaoui and Senior Martial Sister Sushin, he couldn't imagine that they would stand behind a man. Presumably, Chinga also couldn't do that. More or less. In fact, she wanted to say that his personality was too strong, but her personality was also very tough. If they stayed together like this, there would definitely be conflicts. But if she said that, he would be nervous again, wouldn't he? All right. He said seriously, I'll try to change as much as I can. I won't take care of everything and I'll give you a chance to grow. I'll let you rely on your own strength to move forward. Is this enough? She smiled but didn't say anything. Instead, she slowly leaned on him, opened her arms and for the first time, took the initiative to hug him. He also smiled, but he also said seriously, but I also have a request for you. First, she interrupted him. How many more do you have? I've just started. He was dissatisfied. All right, you go first. First, no matter what happens in the future, don't try to solve it by leaving. Do you agree or not? He urged. Yes. Mo Chinga didn't hesitate for too long. This request wasn't excessive at all. If they could be together honestly, there was naturally nothing that couldn't be solved. Second, you can try to have a request for me. Ha! What kind of request is this? Seeing her doubt, she smiled. Although I appreciate self-reliant women, if you're too strong, I won't have a sense of existence. So, if you can rely on me for something, just rely on me. She didn't answer for a long time, so he was a bit nervous. Not good? All right, we'll both take a step back. She couldn't ask him to take a step back for everything. If she did that, wouldn't it be no different from asking for everything? She was a very fair person. But there's no third request, right? She smiled and hugged her tightly. No. Mo Chinga counted her fingers and said, you have 2 requests and I can also change them. Let's make a 2-point agreement. This also wants the same? Isn't it too fair? She ignored him and continued to say, first, you have to trust me. No matter what the situation is, you have to believe what I say. As long as you can do it, I'll also trust you completely. Okay. He didn't hesitate at all. Second, give me a chance to grow on my own until I can stand side by side with you. No problem. Third, didn't you say there's a 2-point agreement? I was just saying. Chapter 288. Mo Chinga held the stone in her hand and stared at it for a long time. This was the Chiun stone she got from Wanderer Ziwei and had forgotten in the depths of her Chinkuan bag. This Chiun stone wasn't big, it was only the size of a child's fist, but she said such a big Chiun stone was already very rare. The Chiun stone he saw was even smaller. Okay, she wasn't greedy. It was good enough to have it. However, such a small Chiun stone couldn't be wasted when refining magic weapons. She could only refine it twice at most, which required a high level of tool refining skills. Her tool refining talent was really not good. It wasn't that she didn't practice these years, but she could only refine magic weapons now, and the success rate wasn't very high. Originally, she was going to find a tool refining master in the group to refine magic weapons, but if she only had 2 Chiun stones, she didn't even dare to find a tool refining master. Refining a natal magic treasure was not the same as refining an ordinary magic treasure. A natal magic treasure had to be connected with the cultivator, so the cultivator had to be present when refining the magic treasure. When to add the blood essence and what effect to achieve, the refiner had to have a very good understanding of the cultivator and the magic treasure. The best way was to refine it herself, but in that case she would have to spend a lot of effort and time to improve her tool refining skills. So troublesome. She muttered to herself. What troublesome? Qin Shi, who was meditating to heal his wounds, opened his eyes and glanced at her. Mo Tienga held the Chiun stone in her hand and said, "We have the materials, but it's very troublesome to refine it. That thing is only a kind of magic weapon conceived by primordial Lady Bisui. She never tested whether it would work or not. Besides, there are so few materials." Qin Shi said, "I'll refine it myself. It's better to refine a natal magic weapon with someone else's help than to refine it myself." Mo Tienga smiled bitterly. "It'd be good if it was that easy, but I don't know how to refine tools. Learn, it's not that difficult." Hearing this understatement, Mo Tienga glared at him. "It's easy for you to say, but not everyone has such good tool refining talent." Qin Shi raised his eyebrows. "I think your pill refining skills are very good. Refining tools and refining pills are the same, so your tool refining skills shouldn't be too bad. This is different." Her pill refining skills were honed by using countless spiritual herbs, but where could she get so many materials for refining weapons? If he were to purchase them wantonly, it would attract too much attention. Why is it different? You will know in the future. Qin Shi didn't say much. He just stared at her with a gaze that made her feel very uneasy. Mo Tienga felt uncomfortable from his stare. "What are you looking at? Have you recovered from your injury?" Qin Shi turned around. "Do you want to have a checkup?" "Forget it," she muttered. To a cultivator, this kind of injury might look terrible, but after a few days, it would heal without even a scar. He was clearly seizing the opportunity to do something. Sure enough, Qin Shi was very disappointed, but he still didn't give up and asked, "You really don't want it?" Mo Tienga rolled her eyes at him, then put away the Chiun stone and continued to ponder about magic weapons. The injuries to their meridians and dantians were almost healed after they healed each other. Right now, Qin Shi's injuries were mainly flesh wounds and would be healed in a few days. Mo Tienga's injuries were injuries to her divine sense. Although she looked completely fine, she would need several years to recuperate. "When are we going up?" This question made Qin Shi put away his smile. He stared at her with a meaningful gaze. "Don't you want to stay here for a few more days? Don't we still have things to do?" Mo Tienga lowered her head and didn't notice his expression. "I'll feel uneasy if I don't finish them." He didn't say anything. The two of them minded their own business. They were inside the mountain wall of tens of thousands of feet peak. Although there was devil aura outside, it was blocked by the restrictions they set up. It wouldn't be too much to say that this was the safest place on Demonic Mountain. It had been 7 or 8 days since Demonic Mountain opened, and many cultivators had encountered danger outside. If they wanted to preserve their strength, it was best to stay here. He originally thought it would be best to stay here for another 7 days. Half a month was enough time to do things, and this place wouldn't be disturbed. Rumble? Suddenly, a loud noise came from somewhere and the mountain began to shake. "What's wrong?" Sensing that the small cave they were in was also shaking, Mo Tienga's expression changed. Could it be that the mountain here is also going to collapse? Qin Shi looked solemn. In just a short while, they saw countless stones rolling down through the gap in the cave entrance. The defensive restrictions they set up to block devil aura couldn't stand it and broke in no time. Not good. A big restriction is collapsing. Mo Tienga was stunned. Just like what happened more than 80 years ago? Qin Shi shook his head. It shouldn't be as serious as it was 80 years ago. But the trouble is, it's very close to us this time. He stepped forward and pulled Mo Tiange over. He took out his 3-yang real fire sword and formed a defensive sword formation around the two of them. Where's your defensive magic weapon? Mo Tiange fumbled in her Qingquan bag. The white silk handkerchief turned into mist and wrapped around the two of them. The shaking became more and more violent. The two of them held each other tightly and were barely able to stand firm. Fortunately, the cave they were in went deep into the mountain. It was very sturdy and small, so there were no signs of collapse. The shaking continued for almost an hour without stopping, and there were still many stones falling from above. Mo Tiange couldn't help but raise her head and ask, "Why is it taking so long?" "Qin," she said, "back then your father and I were trapped here for 7 days. During the first 3 days, stones kept falling and almost buried us here. Later we went to the top of the mountain and saw that the towering mountain had actually been flattened. Rest assured it'll be fine." Mo Tiange wasn't worried about anything. Relying on their magic weapons and cultivation levels, even if the restrictions on 10,000 feet peak collapsed, it wouldn't be a problem for them to keep their lives here. However, she was worried that the restrictions at the entrance would be affected and appear prematurely, causing them to be trapped here. The rumbling sounds grew louder, and through the cracks, more and more rocks rolled down. Both of them had a grave expression on their faces. It seemed that the commotion was too big. All of a sudden, a cyan figure appeared among these stones. A white light flashed and in an instant, it entered the gap in the cave entrance they were in. Then a cyan-clothed man jumped inside. Cough, cough. The man coughed twice. He was covered in stone fragments and his face was covered in dust. He was in a very sorry state. He dusted off the debris on his sleeves and pulled out the flying sword inserted in the cave entrance. When he turned around and saw the two of them, he was stunned. "It's you?" This person was Jing Xingji. He looked at them and finally looked at their interlocked hands. He said with a faint smile, "You two really know how to pick a place. Here, there's really no one to disturb you." Qin Shi didn't like him and his words were so ambiguous. Qin Shi's expression immediately darkened. "Fellow Taoist Jing, please conduct yourself with dignity." Cough, cough. Jing Xingji dusted off the debris and said, "How am I not conducting myself? I'm not falsely accusing you." As he said that, he cast a sidelong glance at him. "Fellow Taoist Shoujing, the matter between a man and a woman is a man's great desire. Why do you have to hide it?" "Jing Xingji," Qin Shi shouted. The more he talked, the more outrageous he became. All right. Jing Xingji waved his hand and said carelessly, "You're thin-skinned, so I won't talk about it, okay?" His peach blossom eyes looked at Mo Tiange. "Unfortunately, fellow Taoist Qingwei, we met too late." Qin Shi didn't say anything. He directly waved his hand, and the 3-yang real fire sword floated in front of him. Jing Xingji retreated helplessly. "I'm afraid of you. I was just joking. Why are you so boring?" Then he said rudely, "Lend me a place to hide." After he said that, a sword light flashed and the flying sword went into the stones. He held the flying sword and looked outside vigilantly. He looked like he was on guard against something. Mo Tiange asked, "Fellow Taoist Jing, why did you appear here?" Jing Xingji still looked outside and said casually, "What else can I do? I was tricked by those 2 old guys. You're smart and left early." As soon as he said that, Qin Shi's attention was also drawn to him. Jing Xingji glanced at them and said, "I originally guessed that Kumu and Tong Tianyun, those 2 old guys, must have other purposes, but we're old friends for more than 100 years, so I wasn't too vigilant against them. We originally planned to split up at the foot of tens of thousands of feet peak, but they said their purpose this time was Immortal's Ruins, so the 3 of us all followed them." "Did you arrive at Immortal's Ruins smoothly?" Qin Shi asked. Jing Xingji shook his head. "Not at all. Madame Feng's injuries became more and more serious. They abandoned her when they crossed the Ruoshui River, but Lei Dongqing unexpectedly turned back to save her and died in the Ruoshui River with her. Alas, I really couldn't tell. I thought Lei Dongqing just liked Madame Feng's beauty, so he usually teased her. I didn't expect him to be infatuated with her. Unfortunately." Qin Shi and Mo Tiange looked at each other. They were both surprised and secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, they escaped in time. Otherwise, even if they were on guard, they would definitely get into a lot of trouble if they were involved in this dispute. "What about you? Why did you fall from above? You should have arrived at Immortal's Ruins with them, right?" Jing Xingji nodded. "As soon as Lei Dongqing and Madame Feng died, I knew those 2 old guys were up to no good. They've been using us along the way. But we were already halfway there. I couldn't advance or retreat on my own, let alone fall out with them, so I had no choice but to continue moving forward with them. Fortunately, we didn't encounter anything too dangerous later. Then why did you come down from above? Were you plotted against by them? I jumped down on my own. Jing Xingji's expression was still indifferent even though he almost died on Demonic Mountain. It seemed he didn't hate Kumu and Tong Tianyun at all. Those two old guys actually made an appointment with several nascent soul seniors in front of Immortal's ruins. It seemed they wanted to follow them to look for treasures. When they entered Immortal's ruins, they left me outside. Not long after, a restriction in Immortal's ruins collapsed. I don't know if it was triggered by them or not, but when I saw the situation wasn't good, I made up my mind and jumped down from above. In the end, I managed to save my life. So that's what they were planning? Qingxi mused. Jing Xingji turned his head and looked at him with a smile. I say, fellow Taoist Shoujing, in any case we've been friends for more than 100 years. Now that we're in trouble together, you won't mind taking me with you when you go up, right? Chapter 289. Mo Chenga was a little surprised. Did she guess Jing Xingji's intentions wrong? He was actually willing to act with them and didn't mind her low cultivation level? On second thought, the situation had changed. Jing Xingji didn't have anyone to cooperate with except them. Even if her cultivation level was a bit low, the three of them could go up and try their luck. Qingxi didn't look happy or angry. He just asked, fellow Taoist Jing, didn't you just come back with your life? Why do you still want to go up? Jing Xingji touched his nose and said, I had no choice but to go alone. Since I ran into you guys, of course I want to go back and see if I can get some benefits. After all, Immortal's ruins isn't easy to go up. He blinked and said, hey, you're so sure you can take your junior martial sister away. In fact, you've been confident for a long time, right? Qingxi didn't speak for a while. Judging from his expression, he wasn't unhappy, but he didn't agree immediately either. Mo Chenga looked at Jing Xingji and suddenly felt he was very familiar. Right, Qingxi also did this. Speaking of which, although their characters weren't compatible, their conversations always gave people a sense of familiarity. What kind of familiar relationship could they have? Their personalities were completely different, and they didn't agree with each other at all. I'll say this first. When we get up there, the place we're going to is only a corner of Immortal's ruins. If you want to go somewhere else, we definitely won't accompany you. Jing Xingji didn't care at all. Whatever. All right, let's join hands. Qingxi said calmly, and Jing Xingji just smiled. The two of them didn't high-five or do anything equivalent to a promise. They just did their own things. This time the earthquake lasted for a whole day. By the time the mountain stabilized, the three of them were unbearably tired. Each of them used their strongest defensive means and were ready to attack at any time. Although it was more daunting than dangerous, they consumed a lot of spiritual aura. Moreover, there was also floating devil aura on the way, so they used up a lot of spiritual aura. The three of them rested in the small cave for a day. When they were full of spiritual aura, they continued to fly to the summit. With Jing Xingji's help, the journey was a lot easier. With Qingxi's three-yang real fire sword formation, Mo Chenga's white silk handkerchief, and Jing Xingji's protective sword light, they originally thought they would need more than a day to reach the summit, but they arrived in just one day. If not for the large amount of demonic energy released due to the collapse of the restriction at the summit, the three of them would not have dared to approach it. Perhaps they would have been even faster. Upon reaching the summit, Mo Chenga was dumbfounded. This is Immortal's ruins? There were rocks everywhere, spirits and demons mixed together. It was a barren wasteland. How could there be a word, celestial, here? Qingxi said, the so-called Immortal's ruins is just what we, the later generations, call it. Demonic Mountain has been a battlefield since ancient times. Although it's said to bury all the immortals, it's actually just a place where all the immortals fell. Mo Chenga heaved a sigh. Before the immortals and demons were separated, the ones who died here were real immortals. Perhaps they would never be able to achieve such heights in their entire lives, but these immortals had only fallen to such a state. Jing Xingji grinned and said, don't underestimate this place. Even after so many years, there are still many treasures left behind by the immortals. It all depends on whether you have the opportunity to obtain them. Really? Looking into the distance, they couldn't see anything special except for one thing. The spiritual aura here was too strong. There was a transparent layer of spiritual aura floating in the sky, purer and cleaner than the spiritual aura they had seen before. In the area enveloped by this spiritual aura layer, the demonic aura could only move around the periphery. What's that? How come I've never seen such a special spiritual aura? It's immortal aura, Qingxi said. Too many immortals died here. After they died, their bodies didn't remain. They all turned into immortal aura. I see. Alright, if you have something to say you can talk about it later. It's time to get to work. Jing Xingji waved his hand. The flying sword on his back was unsheathed, ready to go, and he took the lead. Qin Shi also nodded at her. Let's go. Although there was no devil aura, immortal aura was equally terrifying. They were only cultivators, not immortals. The powerful power contained in immortal aura wasn't something they could withstand. Once their bodies were invaded by immortal aura, their bodies would explode and they would die. The three of them used all kinds of defensive methods and cautiously entered the rubble. Before they arrived at tens of thousands of feet peak, they could occasionally see skeletons in some places, but on this peak, it was completely clean. After immortals died, even their bones wouldn't be left behind. They would directly turn into immortal aura. There were many traces left behind by spells in the surroundings. Even after 1,000,000 years, these traces could still be clearly distinguished. Because immortals had the ability to move mountains and drain seas, the power of their spells was too great, so the traces left behind were naturally spectacular. For example, this tens of thousands of feet peak was originally connected to other peaks, but it was cut off by some kind of immortal weapon, turning it into a lone peak. It wasn't easy for them to even take a stone off this tens of thousands of feet peak, but for immortals they could easily split it. There was also a huge lake on this peak. Upon a closer look, it was actually a trace left behind by a water spell. After 1,000,000 years, it actually still existed. There were also the rubble, the blackened traces, and the huge holes. All of them were traces left behind by spells. Although she didn't see the remains of immortals, Mo Chenga clearly saw that magnificent battle 1,000,000 years ago. This gave her a wonderful feeling as if she was personally experiencing that battle, seeing spells flying everywhere and immortal weapons crisscrossing. Qin Shi walked very slowly on purpose, as if he was deliberately letting her experience this feeling. Jing Xingji wore a rare solemn expression as he silently watched the scene in front of him. The three people's almost leisurely advancing speed was disrupted by the sudden attack. Jing Xingji, who was walking in the front, suddenly stepped on something. A slight click sound was heard, and then a burst of light smoke rose. Jing Xingji's reaction was also very fast. His flying sword flew out at lightning speed and he leaped into the air, barely dodging a flash of lightning. Mo Chenga and Qin Shi instantly flew away. Qin Shi's three-yang real fire sword immediately counterattacked. Mo Chenga waved her hand, and the white silk handkerchief turned into a wisp of light smoke twining around him. At the same time she held a magic weapon in her hand, ready to attack at any time. Soon after, the three people were stunned. Because it wasn't a demonic beast, nor was it a restriction but a wisp of light smoke? Jing Xingji's sword light had already pierced it, and Qin Shi's three-yang real fire sword also instantly emitted a fiery red light. However, this wisp of light smoke was split apart and instantly gathered again. What's this? Jing Xingji looked at Qin Shi in astonishment. Did you see it last time? Qin Shi shook his head. I also don't know. Mo Chenga naturally didn't know either. Just as they spoke, that wisp of light smoke slowly rushed towards them. The three people didn't dare to be careless and retreated. Mo Chenga's speed was slightly slower, so she felt a pain in her arm. She looked down and saw that wherever the wisp of light smoke floated past, a part of the white silk handkerchief's fog was corroded, and a part of her sleeve was also scorched. Qin Shi stepped forward and pulled her. After retreating a certain distance, he pulled up her sleeve, only to see that her originally smooth arm was also scorched black. Qin Shi's expression changed. Does it hurt? Mo Chenga frowned and said, let's not worry about it for now. What should we do with this thing? Jing Xingji glanced at her with that faint smile on his face and said, my flying sword can't cut it and my magic can't burn it. What else can we do? We can only run. As soon as he finished speaking, he rode his flying sword and ran away madly. Qin Shi shook his head. In the next moment he flung his sleeve, summoned his flying cloud and pulled Mo Chenga to escape. That wisp of light smoke caught up with them. It wasn't slow, but both Jing Xingji's flying sword and Qin Shi's flying cloud were extremely fast. Before long, that wisp of light smoke finally stopped chasing them. The three people stopped and all heaved sighs of relief. What kind of strange thing is this? Jing Xingji muttered. No one answered him. Qin Shi pulled Mo Chenga's sleeve and looked at her skin corroded by the wisp of light smoke. He frowned and said, something's wrong. This thing? At first she only felt a little pain, but now Mo Chenga felt a burning pain. Moreover, this kind of pain was getting worse and worse. She originally endured it, but in the end she couldn't bear it anymore. She grabbed Qinxi's sleeve, sweating profusely. It hurts a lot. Qinxi knew her temperament. If it wasn't really painful, she definitely wouldn't scream, so he immediately took out a medicinal pill from his Chenkuan bag. Eat this. Mo Chenga swallowed it as he said and felt a little better. Qinxi pressed her arm and slowly released his spiritual aura. Starting from the wound, he carefully examined it bit by bit. What's wrong? Is there something strange about this thing? Jing Xingji asked. Qinxi didn't say anything. After a while he suddenly made a hand seal. A string of real fire came out of his palm and stuck to the scorched area. Mo Chenga shivered. His real fire wasn't an ordinary cultivator's real fire. He originally cultivated a fire element cultivation technique, and his body also had pure yang spiritual aura. When it burned, her arm, which was already numb, felt another kind of pain. Qinxi noticed it. He paused for a moment, then used his yang spiritual aura to surround the real fire and slowly burned it. The pain eased a little, and Mo Chenga slowly felt the yang spiritual aura enter her body. She didn't need to use it herself. The yin spiritual aura in her body followed it, and the two of them converged. Qinxi's real fire was surrounded by yin and yang spiritual aura and slowly burned it. After a long time, the scorched area finally began to shrink. By the time the scorched area disappeared from Mo Chenga's arm, most of their spiritual aura had been consumed. Jing Xingji didn't understand what happened. Now that they stopped, he asked, "What's going on? Your real fire can burn it, but why didn't it work just now?" Qinxi said, "This is the extreme yang real fire I comprehended when I formed my nascent soul. It's different from the real fire on the 3 yang real fire sword." "Then why didn't you use it just now?" This question made Qinxi snort. "That's easy for you to say. It's very troublesome to mobilize this real fire. The smoke was too fast, I couldn't do it in time." "Oh, I see." Jing Xingji nodded. "Since you can heal, I'm relieved. Don't be happy too early." Qinxi glanced at him indifferently. "If it were you, I wouldn't be able to help." Jing Xingji was puzzled. "What?" Qinxi didn't answer. He just shook his head and said to Mo Chenga, "Rest for a while and restore your spiritual aura." His extreme yang real fire was very overbearing. If it weren't for his and Mo Chenga's yin and yang spiritual aura acting as a buffer, Mo Chenga's hand would have been burned before she could burn the black aura. Chapter 290. Mo Chenga and Qinxi took turns to meditate, leaving one person on guard. Clearly they didn't trust Jing Xingji. Jing Xingji was bored, so he said he was going to look around. When his figure disappeared, Qinxi, who was meditating, suddenly opened his eyes and said, "This brat is also dishonest." Although Qinxi's attitude had always been very clear that he didn't like Jing Xingji, he seemed to be very familiar with Jing Xingji. For example, if he wasn't familiar with Jing Xingji, he would never call him brat. Mo Chenga asked, "What's your relationship with him? I always feel that although you two don't talk much, you know each other very well." Qinxi smiled and said, "Of course I know him. I've known him for more than 100 years, even earlier than Kumu and the others." "Why is that?" Qinxi didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked her with a smile, "Why don't you guess?" Mo Chenga thought for a while and said, "You said he was a disciple of venerable swordsman Zhongguang from Gujin sect. Unfortunately, his master died early, so he wasn't very successful in Gujin sect. Presumably, when his master was still alive, he was also a proud son of heaven, right?" Qinxi nodded. "Yes." Mo Chenga said, "Judging from his age, he seems to be about the same as you, so the difference should be no more than 100 years. Since the two of you are about the same age and both are proud disciples of nascent soul cultivators from big sects, it's not too much to say you're the same kind of people. Did you meet because of that?" Qinxi just smiled and pulled her to sit next to him. "Did I guess right or not?" "You're half right." Qinxi paused and said slowly, "In fact, when I met him, I didn't know his identity. Could it be that the two of you met each other when you were traveling?" "Yes. At that time, I was in the middle stage of the foundation building realm and so was he." "So early?" Mo Chenga was a little surprised. Middle stage of the foundation building realm. Wasn't he only in his 30s or 40s? Qinxi smiled and opened his left hand. With a dazzling golden light, the 3 yang real fire sword appeared in his hand. He looked at the sword and said with emotion, "In the blink of an eye, it's been more than 150 years. Back then, I obtained the method to refine the sword and the cultivation technique together with him. We even encountered the yang spiritual bead at that time." What? Upon seeing Mo Chenga's incredulous expression, Qin Shi sheathed his sword and slowly explained in detail, "At that time, I hadn't entered the middle stage of the foundation building realm for long. One time when I was outside I happened to enter a place called Mount Lang with someone else. That place was very strange. This mountain was surrounded by excellent high-grade spirit veins, but it didn't have even the slightest bit of spiritual aura." No spiritual aura? A thought flashed through Mo Chenga's mind. She asked, "Is it because of the Yang spiritual bead?" Qin Shi nodded with a smile. "Yes. It was said that a long time ago, there was an ancient immortal's cave here. So many people came here to search for treasures. At first I didn't believe this rumor, but I also felt that this place was strange. So I went with the others. Who would have thought that when we arrived, an immortal's cave really did appear in the middle of Mount Lang. Mount Lang immediately became a living hell. Low-level cultivators swarmed in and high-level cultivators appeared frequently. He was lost in thought for a while before continuing. Too many people died at that time. In the end, those high-level cultivators had the upper hand and occupied the cave. At that time my cultivation level was still low, so I naturally didn't fight with them. I just secretly sent a message to my master, telling him about the situation here. Then I happened to meet Jing Xingji. Just like me, he happened to escape a calamity. We were in the same situation and we were in trouble together, so we naturally joined hands." "What happened next? Since you obtained the method to refine the 3-yang real fire sword and the yang spiritual bead, presumably Jing Xingji also obtained some benefits, right?" Qin Shi said faintly, "The sword in his hand is an ancient cultivation sword. It's extremely powerful. Our luck was good. It turns out that there was an ancient cultivation sect hidden in Mount Lang. The Immortal's Cave didn't count for much, but we found the real treasure trove. This ancient cultivation group seemed to have been exterminated in the end, leaving behind a lot of treasures. I guess the reason they were exterminated was probably because of the existence of the Yang spiritual bead. All the spirit veins in the mountain were sucked dry, so this cultivation group naturally couldn't continue to exist." Mo Chenga sighed with emotion. "In that case, the two of you are the biggest winners of this trip." Qin Shi smiled. "It's not our turn. We managed to save our lives with great difficulty. Later, Master finally arrived and Venerable Swordsman Zhongguang also happened to come. It was only then that we found out the other party's identity. In the end, the treasures in Mount Lang were divided among several big cultivation groups. The benefits Jing Xingji and I obtained couldn't be considered much." That was true. An entire ancient cultivation group had countless treasures. Presumably, they were only a few more than the collections of the 7 big cultivation groups. Even if many of them couldn't be used anymore, they were still a huge fortune. But even so, I really don't have a good impression of this person. He's much more trustworthy than Kumu and the others, but after Venerable Swordsman Zhongguang passed away, he suffered a lot of unfair treatment and attached great importance to benefits. I don't like this kind of character." Mo Chenga nodded. "Moreover, he's frivolous. He's not the same kind of person as us." Upon hearing what she said, Qin Shi smiled and tightened his grip on her hand. Jing Xingji had been flirting with her on the way. Although he didn't take it seriously, he always felt uncomfortable. Now that he heard what she said, he felt all the knots in his heart disappeared. How could the woman he fancied be like those superficial people who only looked at appearances? Even if Jing Xingji's face was like a peach blossom and his tongue was like honey, she still wouldn't like him. The two of them were silently enjoying a moment of peace when Mo Chenga suddenly remembered something. "Has your spiritual aura recovered?" Qin Shi nodded. "I have the Yang spiritual bead, so my spiritual aura recovers much faster. I've been fine for a long time." Mo Chenga paused for a moment and suddenly understood. In other words, he deliberately let Jing Xingji leave just now to avoid talking to me? Thinking up to this point, Mo Chenga felt her face burning. She coughed and said, Let's talk about it later," Qin Shi said. "When I said this boy wasn't honest, I didn't just say it casually." Mo Chenga was stunned. "What did you see?" Qin Shi snorted and said, "With his character, if he didn't have certain benefits, he wouldn't have followed us to Immortal's ruins. I'm sure his original purpose was here." Mo Chenga knew nothing about Jing Xingji's character, so she couldn't say anything. However, Qin Shi was never a person who talked nonsense. Since he said it, he must have his reasons. "If that's the case, won't he implicate us?" Qin Shi shook his head. "Let's wait and see. Although he and I aren't friends, we've been friends for more than 100 years. He's a person who values benefits, but he won't stab us in the back. At most, he'll tell us to pray for our own luck." Mo Chenga nodded. You believe him and I believe you. Upon hearing this, Qinshi smiled and said softly, when we go back we'll report it to Master, okay? Mo Chenga naturally understood the meaning of his words, but she was a bit hesitant. Let's talk about it later. Qinshi was stunned. What? Didn't she agree? Mo Chenga looked away and avoided his gaze. When we go back you'll enter closed-door meditation to form your nascent soul, right? This was almost certain. He already said that he failed to form his nascent soul 3 times because he missed her. He tried everything he could but couldn't get rid of her. Now that they were committed with his character, he'd naturally go back to form his nascent soul. Of course, Qinshi said, when we find your father's corpse we can go back. Now that everything is ready, we won't have to worry about forming our nascent soul. Seeing that she didn't speak, Qinshi's expression slowly darkened. Chenga, what are you thinking? Why do I feel like I still can't understand you? You're not willing to rely on me too much so I can understand you. But now we're all ready. Don't you want to perform dual cultivation with me? Mo Chenga was stunned for a while before she said, I just think now isn't the right time. You want to form your nascent soul so you naturally can't be distracted. As for me, I also need some time to adapt to core formation. Let's take it slow. Qinshi didn't say anything but his gaze revealed his displeasure. After a while he said, I originally didn't plan to perform dual cultivation before I formed my nascent soul, but I don't want to wait anymore. What? Mo Chenga couldn't help but ask, isn't it good for us to be like this now? She asked too quickly as if she was unwilling, so Qinshi's expression didn't look good. He calmed down and asked, then, after we go back, are you willing to move to my immortal's cave? Mo Chenga was stunned. You have to enter closed-door meditation to form your nascent soul, and I might also enter closed-door meditation during this period of time. This isn't necessary, right? Qinshi smiled with a hint of self-mockery. You see, you're always so restrained, which gives me the illusion that you don't have that many feelings. Sometimes I feel strange. How can there be a woman like you? So calm that people feel you're heartless. This obviously wasn't a compliment. His tone even carried a hint of complaint. People were always strange like this. He hoped to have a quiet and rational woman who wouldn't affect his cultivation, but she was too quiet and rational, which made him feel unreconciled. He always felt he wasn't that important in her heart. Mo Chenga didn't refute him. She was silent for a while then said slowly, I thought about it a long time ago. We're cultivators so we're different from mortals. Even if we live together, so what? Cultivators spend most of their long lives in closed-door meditation. How much time do we really have together? Maybe not as much as mortal couples. That being the case, why should we be in such a hurry? Yes, you're right. However, there's a way to solve this. Mo Chenga was puzzled. What way? We practice the same cultivation technique, Qinshi said. With our constitutions, dual cultivation is better than others. If we practice the same cultivation technique, our progress will definitely be amazing. Mo Chenga was shocked. You mean we should give up our current cultivation technique and practice dual cultivation? Mo Chenga once again fell silent after receiving confirmation. Dual cultivation techniques were cultivation techniques that Tao companions practicing dual cultivation together practiced. The most famous dual cultivation group in the Celestial Pole was Biyun sect, one of the 7 great cultivation groups. Most of the disciples of Biyun sect practiced dual cultivation techniques, and only when a man and a woman practiced dual cultivation together could they achieve miraculous results. However, they were different. She and Qinshi each had their own special cultivation techniques. Her Sunu art of the origin, while his art of 3 primordial cycles and pure yang technique had already reached a certain realm. Furthermore, they were very compatible with each other's constitutions. With their current situation, they usually cultivated separately. Occasionally being together was enough for the cycle of yin and yang. It would be a pity if they gave up. We don't have a suitable cultivation technique. Besides, if we did that, wouldn't my spiritual roots of the origin be meaningless? This is different, Qinshi said firmly. Just tell me if you agree or not. If you agree, I'll take care of these things. Chapter 291. I don't know. After a long time, Mo Chenga sighed and said, I always feel that you walk too fast and think too fast. I can't keep up with your footsteps. Qinshi was stunned. He was silent. The two of them sat in silence for a while, experiencing this feeling in their hearts. They both had their own opinions. Since they embarked on the path of cultivation, They never stopped for others and never accommodated to other people's ideas. Once they decided what to do, they would walk according to their own ideas. But it was different now. They had to adapt to another person's footsteps and take into consideration another person's ideas. Some things couldn't be the same as before. "Let me think about it," she said. Qin, she answered softly. It's not that I don't agree or anything." After a while, Tiange said slowly, "It's just, I'm not used to this feeling. Do you understand?" After a while, Qin, she nodded. "I understand." After a while, he held her hand and smiled. "Do you think I'm too anxious? That I didn't give you time to adapt?" "A little bit," Tiange said, slowly thinking about the feeling in her heart. "It's too fast. I can't adapt. Besides, I think we both have our own ideas about cultivation. Why don't we continue according to our original plan? You want to form your nascent soul, so you'll definitely enter closed-door meditation when you go back. As for me, I have to refine my natal magic weapon and study core formation cultivation techniques to slowly adapt to some things in the core formation stage. Now isn't the time for us to be carefree. If we change our current lives too hastily, won't we mess up our pace?" Seeing that Qinshi's face finally brightened, she smiled. "You said we'll practice the same cultivation technique, but I think there are still many problems to solve. First, there's the gap between our cultivation levels. If we perform dual cultivation after you form your nascent soul, it'll naturally be beneficial for me, but it's not a good choice for you. But if you don't form your nascent soul because of this, it's even worse. You're already in the peak stage of the core formation realm. If we continue to waste time, it'll only be a waste of time." She paused and looked at Qinshi's expression. Qinshi nodded. "You're right. Second, our constitutions and spiritual roots are both special. If we choose dual cultivation, won't we be able to make full use of each other's characteristics? Otherwise, wouldn't all of this be meaningless?" Qinshi nodded again. "You're right." But his expression was too calm, making Tiange rather confused. "Then what do you think?" Qinshi smiled. He put his arm around her waist and leaned on her shoulder, not saying anything for a long time. Tiange crawled out of the room unwillingly. "You clearly know I'm anxious to know, yet you still won't tell me? And so you're also anxious?" Qinshi said with a nod. You know that's not what I meant." The heavy atmosphere changed again after he said that. Qinshi smiled. It was unknown whether it was because he was proud of himself or because he was amused. After a long time, he finally said leisurely, "Everything you said makes sense, but am I someone without a plan?" Only then did Qinshi's expression turn serious. He said, "Rest assured, I'm not talking nonsense. After we go back, I'll slowly tell you what happened in detail." Upon seeing his expression and hearing his words, Tiange was confused. "Is there something I don't know?" Qinshi pursed his lips and smiled, but he didn't answer. "Why aren't you telling me?" Tiange didn't want to give up and urged him. "Now isn't the time to talk." Qinshi suddenly looked away. "You." Just as she was about to continue asking, she suddenly saw Jing Xingji walking towards them from the corner of her eye. She hastily let go of his hand, feeling remorseful in her heart. She found that her vigilance had decreased. Her divine sense was clearly observing the surroundings, but she actually didn't notice Jing Xingji was so close to her. Or did Jing Xingji have some special means? This wasn't strange. He was already in the late stage of the core formation realm and was very strong. Maybe he had some means that prevented her divine sense from noticing him. Although she let go of his hand a long time ago, Jing Xingji had already seen it. Now that he came back, his gaze swept over them and he suddenly said to Qinshi, "No wonder you were so rude to me this time." "So that's why," Qinshi snorted. "It's good that you know." Jing Xingji smiled and glanced at Tiange with his peach blossom eyes. "Why didn't you say it earlier? If you said it, I naturally wouldn't make you unhappy. Why didn't you say it? Or were you too embarrassed to say it?" Qinshi's expression darkened. "Since you've rested enough, let's continue?" "Ha." Jing Xingji chuckled, but his expression turned serious again. "I still want to say, Qin Shoujing, you also have this day." Right after he said that, he walked away with a complacent expression. "Wait." Qinshi frowned and said, "I'll walk in front." Jing Xingji nodded indifferently and retreated to the back. If they encountered that kind of situation again, he wouldn't be able to save her if he was careless and got hit. If it was Qinshi, as he said, it would be easier to deal with. The three of them continued to move forward in silence. Jing Xingji really restrained himself and didn't try to seduce Tiange again, intentionally or otherwise. Tiange also heaved a sigh of relief. After walking for a while, Emochenga suddenly said, "Wait." The other two people stopped. She turned around. "What's wrong?" Emochenga carefully looked at the surrounding scenery, then said with a frown, "Don't you think our surroundings haven't changed at all?" Both Shi and Xingji frowned and looked around. Emochenga said slowly, "That's not right. Our surroundings have changed, but the changes are very subtle and almost unrecognizable." As she said that, she turned around again and her expression darkened. "Can you tell where we came from?" Shi and Xingji turned around and their expressions changed. As far as they could see, the scenery was almost the same. They actually couldn't tell where they came from. The three of them stood for a while. Xingji asked, "Qin Shoujing, is there a maze formation here?" Shi shook his head. "I don't know." "You don't know?" Xingji didn't believe him. "You actually don't know? Didn't your master tell you?" Shi withdrew his gaze and said, "My master said it's not strange for anything to appear in Immortal's ruins. Even if we didn't encounter anything this time, every time we came here there would be subtle changes." He then turned around and asked Emochenga, "You're more proficient in formations. What do you think?" During this time, Emochenga had been observing the changes around her. Her eyes, divine sense and ears hadn't relaxed at all. Upon hearing his question, she just shook her head and said, "This isn't a formation." "What?" Xingji and Shi didn't dare to believe it. A similar scene, a confusing scene. These weren't caused by a maze formation? Emochenga said, "There must be a formation position for a formation. But use your divine sense to observe. Are there any spiritual aura fluctuations around here?" Upon hearing that, the two of them released their divine senses. After a while, their expressions became more and more solemn. Even if their formations weren't good enough, they still noticed something was wrong. The spiritual aura fluctuations around here were so weak. After all, this was Immortal's ruins. The sky above Immortal's ruins was covered with a lot of immortal aura, so how could the spiritual aura here be so weak? "Then what do you think it might be?" "I don't know." Emochenga looked confused. "It's very strange. This doesn't conform to the way of formations, so it's not a formation. But there's no hallucinogenic thing around." "I'm also confused." Shi nodded. "The things in Immortal's ruins are far beyond our cultivation levels, so it's not strange that you don't know." The three of them were silent. After a while, Xingji asked, "Then what should we do? We can't just stand here, right? Should we go or not?" Shi thought about it and said, "Keep going. If they didn't go, they would really be trapped here." "Okay." Xingji didn't have any objections. He was also a bold person. Emochenga naturally didn't object. But after walking for a while, she felt something was wrong. Why is there such a thick fog?" Emochenga asked curiously. The fog was not only getting thicker, but it also smelled very choking. No one answered her. She didn't care. She rubbed her nose and kept walking. But after a few more steps, she immediately stopped. Something was wrong. This time something was really wrong. There was no one around her. Upon discovering this, Emochenga immediately spread her divine sense. However, for some unknown reason, this fog actually blocked her divine sense from reaching her. After standing in place for a while, Emochenga calmed down, then raised her voice and shouted, "Senior Marshal Brother? Senior Marshal Brother?" Still no one answered her. Her voice even echoed in the distance. At this moment, Emochenga felt her hair stand on end. The two cultivators walking in front and behind her, one in the peak stage of the core formation realm and the other in the late stage, didn't hide their breaths. What kind of power did they have? Her divine sense was very sharp, so she was always paying attention to her surroundings. But just now, these two cultivators suddenly disappeared, and she didn't even notice them before and after they disappeared. This was too terrifying. She forced herself to calm down. This was wrong, very wrong. She had to think, right? When she asked, she paid attention to the fog around her for a split second. After that split second, the two powerful breaths disappeared, and she didn't feel anything abnormal. The fog here. Thinking of this, Emochenga immediately searched her Qingquan bag, took out a jade bottle and swallowed a medicinal pill. This was a heart-clearing pill which had the effect of calming the mind. Generally speaking, taking one when one's mind was in a mess would help calm the mind. After thinking for a while, she swallowed another refreshing pill in case this fog was poisonous. Then she sat cross-legged on the ground and calmed her mind. There was definitely something wrong with this fog. It could numb a cultivator's divine sense unconsciously. Otherwise, with the sharpness of her divine sense, There was no reason she couldn't sense Qin Shi and Jing Xingji's disappearance. But now, the two of them suddenly disappeared without a trace and she actually didn't notice them at all. She had to restore the sharpness of her divine sense to find the two people who disappeared. Time passed bit by bit. Emo Chenga was startled awake when a hand pressed on her shoulder. "What's wrong?" Jing Xingji looked at her with a frown. She was stunned. She turned around to look for Qin Shi, but Jing Xingji said, "No need to look. I looked for a long time and only saw you sitting here. I don't know where Qin Shoujing is." Chapter 292. She was separated from Qin Shi. Upon realizing this, Emo Tienga heaved a sigh. There were so many strange things in Immortal's ruins that she had to think about every step she took. Under such circumstances, it was really difficult to move forward without someone she could trust. Jing Xingji was a person Qin Shi thought was generally trustworthy, but that wasn't necessarily true for her. This person was a typical utilitarian. Even though he was used to fawning over women and had thrown her countless flirtatious glances along the way, in the depths of his heart, he only used strength to measure strength. If there was any possibility of her dragging him down, he would unceremoniously leave her behind. Thinking of this, Emo Tienga cheered up. In any case, she had to persevere and find Qin Shi. "Fellow Taoist Jing, what do you think about the current situation?" Upon hearing her question, Jing Xingji still looked lazy and said, "There's something wrong with this fog." Nonsense, she also knew there was something wrong. Seeing that Jing Xingji was just dealing with her, Emo Tienga said bluntly, "With fellow Taoist Jing's experience, you should know more than this, right?" Jing Xingji smiled and glanced at her. "I also know that this fog has a great impact on divine senses. Fellow Taoist Qingwei, your divine sense can't play any role here." Emo Tienga's eyes moved, but she didn't say anything. Jing Xingji's current attitude was very clear. He wanted to see if she had a way. If she had a way, he might try his best. If she didn't, he probably didn't want to carry a burden. Realizing this, Emo Tienga lowered her head and pondered. "Fuck. Divine sense. All of a sudden." She asked, "Fellow Taoist Jing, when we were separated just now, what did you feel?" Jing Xingji thought for a while, then said, I didn't feel anything. It was like I was lost in thought for a while, and when I turned around, I found you were gone." Emo Tienga nodded. "It seems this fog can paralyze our divine senses and make our senses wrong." Jing Xingji nodded carelessly. Emo Tienga said, "I'm afraid it's more than that. Even if it paralyzes our divine senses, there's no reason we can't find them by the time we react. Perhaps it can even mislead our senses." Upon hearing this, Jing Xingji took another look at her. Emo Tienga didn't understand the meaning behind his gaze, so she continued to say, "That being the case, we can't trust our divine senses and senses." Jing Xingji chuckled. "That being the case, does fellow Taoist Qingwei have a solution?" His attitude was very casual. Obviously, he didn't think Emo Tienga could solve the current situation. Without saying anything, Emo Tienga took out a flying sword from her Chengkuan bag, then lowered her head and started to carve something on the ground. In fact, Jing Xingji knew very well in his heart that Qin Shi had high standards. Since this junior martial sister of his was accepted as Lord Taoist Jinghe's disciple and also received special treatment from him, she definitely had some outstanding qualities. Jing Xingji didn't believe that guy, Qin Shoujing, would take a fancy to an idiot. However, he also didn't think too highly of Emo Tienga because the so-called title of genius was too exaggerated. People who cultivated fast might not necessarily be strong, and people with high comprehension might not necessarily be quick-witted. But when he saw what Emo Tienga drew on the ground, his expression turned serious. Emo Tienga put away her flying sword and took out a sound-transmitting jade talisman from her robe. This jade talisman was a 1,000-mile sound-transmitting talisman. It was prepared to be used when they were separated, but she didn't have many of them, so she didn't use them immediately when they were separated to avoid wasting them in the fog. The sound-transmitting jade talisman ignited with a fiery red light. It was about to break through the sky and fly away, but it fell again after flying only several feet. Jing Xingji was disappointed. Even the sound-transmitting talisman doesn't work? Emo Tienga was only stunned for a moment. She then continued to draw her flying sword and carve on the ground. What she drew was the position of an ancient 8 trigrams formation diagram, which came from the Xuanji formation book. In the fog, the naked eye could only see several feet ahead. If they walked casually, they would be like a headless fly, unable to distinguish directions. If they walked according to this 8 trigrams formation diagram, they would at least know which direction they were going and wouldn't go astray. Even if it was a dead end, they could go back the way they came. After she finished drawing the formation diagram, Mo Tiange carefully examined the surrounding scenery. After confirming there was no danger, she chose a direction and took the lead. Jing Xingji lowered his head to look at the formation diagram she drew. Without saying anything, he followed her. This time the two of them didn't get separated. Since they knew the fog could paralyze divine senses, the two of them were very careful. After walking for a while, Mo Tiange once again drew the formation diagram and repeated the process several times. Since the sound-transmitting talisman couldn't be used, she could only leave an imprint. Although she couldn't be considered proficient in formations, he should be able to recognize her words. If he saw her, he could follow the formation diagram to find her, and the two of them could reunite. Just like that, she and Jing Xingji walked further and further away from each other. She soon realized he was lost. Moreover, when he turned around, Mo Tiange and Jing Xingji were nowhere to be seen. He didn't panic. He unfolded the three-young real fire sword and circled around his body. He then closed his eyes and spread his divine sense. But soon he discovered he couldn't spread his divine sense, and he couldn't even use the sound-transmitting talisman. Realizing his situation, she thought for a while and did the same thing as Mo Tiange. He took medicinal pills and meditated. Unfortunately, during this period of time when he was calm, no one came to pat him on the shoulder. After a long time, he opened his eyes and found his divine sense still couldn't spread in the fog. It seemed the fog itself was blocking his divine sense, not his divine sense being disturbed by the fog. He sat for a while, but the solution he chose was completely different from Mo Tiange's. He wasn't good at formations, so he didn't think of using formations as a mark. Instead, he waved his sleeves and brandished the sword light of the three-young real fire sword, burning the fog. Under the pressure of the fiery red sword light, the fog dispersed, but when he stopped for a moment, it swept over again. She stopped. This fog was very similar to the light smoke just now. Although it wasn't corrosive, it wasn't afraid of his sword light either. After thinking for a while, he straightened the sword and wiped the sword with 2 fingers of his right hand. Blood flowed out, emitting a dazzling light. He didn't tell Jing Xingji the truth. Extreme young real fire could be used to defend against enemies. The three-young real fire sword once again brandished the sword light. Under the extreme young real fire, the fog was finally burned away bit by bit, and a bright view appeared. She stopped using the extreme young real fire sword and cautiously walked forward. He hadn't walked far when he suddenly heard a loud rumble. She listened attentively and his expression changed. This was the sound of fighting. Moreover, the sound wasn't small, it was at least a nascent soul cultivator. He only thought for a moment before he used his body technique and ran toward the source of the sound. He had been separated from Mo Tiange, but he was sure she wasn't too far away. The sound was too loud, so Mo Tiange would definitely hear it. At that time, the two of them could meet at the source of the sound. After flying for a while, the fog around him became thinner and thinner without him noticing, and he finally ran out of the scope of the fog. But this didn't make Shi feel relieved, because as soon as he came out of the fog, he was locked on by several divine senses. This place was a huge crater. It was said that this crater was left behind by the immortals of the distant past era who used some earth-shattering fire magic art. For millions of years, the fire had never been extinguished. There was also a legend that the fire in this volcano was comparable to the Samadhi real fire, one of the 3 great real fires. Unfortunately, for so many years, no one had ever been able to take away the real fire. Now there were 2 groups of 4 nascent soul cultivators standing on the edge of this crater. There were 3 people on one side, and there was only 1 cultivator wrapped in black aura on the other side. She glanced at them and frowned because the nascent soul cultivator standing alone was the number 1 late-stage nascent soul cultivator in the celestial pole, Master Song Feng. Although he looked calm, he was complaining in his heart. He wasn't afraid of other nascent soul cultivators. After all, he was Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple and his cultivation level wasn't bad, so others would always give him some face. Even if they didn't give him face, he could always run away if he couldn't defeat them. But this Master Song Feng was an anomaly. This person had a grudge against both his master and himself, and he was also very skilled. When he left Mount Taikang last time, he was almost killed by Master Song Feng. If he hadn't launched a secret technique in time and the nascent soul cultivators from his school hadn't come to greet him, he would have lost his life. Now they met this person on Demonic Mountain. He just hoped Tiange wouldn't come. Otherwise, it would be even more difficult for the two of them to escape. Oh. Master Song Feng was quite surprised to see him, but then he chuckled and said, God treats me well today. Qin Shoujing, you little kid actually delivered yourself to my door. At that moment, Qin Shi's gaze swept over the three nascent soul cultivators in front of Master Song Feng, and his heart settled. The three nascent soul cultivators were all in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. One was a young female cultivator, one was a middle-aged scholar, and the last was a handsome Taoist. He knew all three of them. The young female cultivator and the middle-aged scholar were wearing elegant white clothes with green hairpins and clouds embroidered on their cuffs. They were a pair of Tao companions from Biyun sect. The female cultivator was called Ding Luan, and the scholar was called Feng Xiao. They were known as the Luan and Feng immortal couple in the celestial pole. They were the only pair of Tao companions whose cultivation levels were above the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, so they were very famous. The handsome Taoist was surnamed Ji, and people called him Taoist priest Ji. He was from Tiandao sect. These three people all had some friendship with his master, and their relationship was passable. Judging from the current situation, they had already fallen out with Master Song Feng, so they would more or less protect him. Thinking up to this point, he smiled slightly and didn't pay attention to Master Song Feng. Instead, he politely saluted the three nascent soul cultivators. Senior Ding, Senior Feng, Senior Ji, it's been a long time since we last met. Seniors, are you all well? Seeing that he was so polite, Ding Luan smiled and said, Qin brat, why are you also here? Where's your master? Qin Shi was already 200 years old. Among core formation cultivators he could be considered young, but he wasn't old enough to be called brat, casually. Ding Luan, on the other hand, looked like she was in her prime, but her real age was 700 or 800 years old. Calling him brat was an act of respect. Qin Shi said, Junior came to Demonic Mountain this time on the orders of my master. My master isn't far away and will arrive soon. He naturally made this up to tell Master Song Feng that his master was here. Upon hearing what he said, Master Song Feng snorted coldly. Qin Shoujing, do you think I'll believe you just because you say it casually? It's best that you delivered yourself to my door today. After I get rid of the three of them, I'll also get rid of you to avenge my poor disciple. Before Qin Shi could answer, Feng Xiao already sneered and said, Old Song Feng, aren't you afraid that the wind will sprain your tongue? Do you really think you're the #1 cultivator in the celestial pole and invincible? You're just one person. Although our cultivation levels are lower than yours, we're not to be trifled with. Ah! Black aura surged on Master Song Feng's body, and he said in a contemptuous tone, What Luan and Feng immortal couple? I really don't care. Who's the one who sprained his tongue? Chapter 293. Old Song Feng, Ding Luan said with a smile, but her tone was contemptuous. If I were you, I would have gone into hiding a long time ago, but you're still so proud of yourself. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at by all the cultivators in the world? Ding Luan looked gentle, but her words were very rude. Master Song Feng, who was used to being scolded, was angry now. He sneered and said, Laughed at by all the cultivators in the world? Woman surnamed Ding, why don't you drag them out and scold them for me to hear? Why are you still talking nonsense here? You're the one who likes to talk nonsense, not me. Ding Luan's tongue was like a knife, but she kept smiling. Do you really think those kids think you're the #1 cultivator in the celestial pole? I've seen people who think highly of themselves, but I've never seen anyone who thinks so highly of themselves like you. Let's not talk about the past. Let's see if this Qin brat takes you seriously or not. Qin Shi smiled bitterly in his heart. Although he had a grudge against Master Song Feng, he wasn't arrogant enough to think he could escape from a great late-stage nascent soul cultivator with his own strength. Right now, he wanted to use the presence of the three nascent soul cultivators to dilute his sense of existence, but this senior Ding pushed him out to attract Master Song Feng's attention. However, he couldn't blame Ding Luan. For Lord Taoist Jinghe's sake, Ding Luan was willing to protect him, which was already good enough. Master Song Feng's figure hidden in the black aura couldn't be seen clearly, but he glanced at them fiercely and said, Woman Ding, don't talk nonsense. Since you're not willing to give way, don't blame me for being ruthless. As he spoke, his whole body merged into the black aura and suddenly attacked the three people. Although their words were full of contempt, the three people didn't dare to underestimate Master Song Feng's attack. Ding Luan and Feng Xiao both retreated at the same time, using their teleportation techniques and magic weapons. Both of their magic weapons were musical instruments. Ding Luan held the zither and Feng Xiao held the flute, instantly spreading a thick music net. Master Song Feng's black aura looked fierce, but it was blocked by this music net. Upon seeing this, Taoist Ji smiled faintly. He took out a huge wine gourd from his bosom and took a sip leisurely. All of a sudden, he opened his mouth, and the fine wine in his mouth shot out like an arrow towards Master Song Feng's black aura. Master Song Feng withdrew the devil aura all over his body and swiftly retreated. Although his words were arrogant and his methods were ruthless, he was not an arrogant person. Although he said that he looked down on the Yuan and Phoenix immortal couple, he understood in his heart that the couple's cultivation was not bad and their teamwork was quite good. Their fighting strength was not inferior to a late-stage cultivator, so he could not take them lightly. What's more, there was Taoist Ji next to him. Taoist Ji didn't like to talk, and some people even said that he was a mute. However, when he made a move, he was extremely sharp. He often set up hidden traps and people would unknowingly fall into his trap. Therefore, even though his tone was arrogant, he didn't dare to be careless in his heart and was extremely cautious. However, since he had already made his move, there was no reason for him to stop. As soon as they saw Master Song Feng retreating, Ding Yuan and Feng Xiao rushed forward. The sound of the flute changed to the sound of the zither. The music, which was originally as deep as the yellow sky and thick earth, became sonorous and fierce, shaking people's hearts and souls. Qin Shi was stimulated by the sound of the zither and flute, and he felt the spiritual aura inside his body surging. He almost couldn't control it, so he immediately steadied his mind and wholeheartedly guided the spiritual aura back. Insignificant skill. Master Song Feng snorted coldly. A black object suddenly flew out of the black aura. Its speed was extremely fast and it suddenly smashed towards the Yuan and Feng couple. As soon as this black object left the range of Master Song Feng's black aura, it suddenly swelled up. In an instant, it became like a small mountain and suddenly pressed down on the Yuan and Feng couple. Seeing this, the sound of the Yuan and Feng couple changed, becoming simple and deep again. But this time it wasn't so easy to block. Master Song Feng grinned hideously. The small mountain broke through the net of music and pressed down on the two of them with great momentum. Ding Yuan and Feng Xiao looked extremely solemn. The couple looked at each other, stopped playing, and each threw the zither and flute in their hands. These two magic weapons carried extremely dense spiritual aura, and under the support of the couple's spiritual aura, they suddenly burst into dazzling spiritual light. Qin Shi felt it was extremely dazzling, so he couldn't help but raise his hand to block the spiritual light. This wasn't the first time he saw nascent soul cultivators fighting. He had an extraordinarily powerful nascent soul master, so his vision was originally very high. However, when he saw these people fighting, he still felt he couldn't watch them closely. Nascent soul cultivators were nascent soul cultivators after all. Although he was only one step away from the nascent soul realm, his strength was still far from them. If he had already formed his nascent soul now, even if he was only in the early stage of the nascent soul realm, he definitely wouldn't be completely powerless when facing these people. Master Song Feng, Ding Yuan and Feng Xiao were fighting fiercely, but there was also a quiet Taoist Ji next to them. Taoist Ji looked to be in his early 20s and looked very delicate. Rumor had it that when he traveled outside, people often regarded him as an aura-refining disciple who didn't understand worldly affairs, but when it came to fighting he was no less ruthless than Master Song Feng. Over the years, it was unknown how many blind cultivators had been deceived by his harmless appearance and died in his hands. In the spiritual light of the fight between Master Song Feng, Ding Yuan and Feng Xiao, Qin Shi couldn't see their movements clearly, but he knew this was the best time. Therefore he quietly took out a jade talisman from his Qingquan bag and flicked it with his fingertips. The jade talisman burst into flames and soared into the sky under the cover of the spiritual light. Fortunately, this time he finally sent it out smoothly. The jade talisman disappeared into the sky, and the fight suddenly stopped. The devil aura on Master Song Feng's body disappeared and he snorted coldly. Qin Shoujing, what the hell are you doing now? Qin Shi smiled. He knew this old man wouldn't let him go easily even though he hadn't dealt with him yet. Nothing. Junior just wanted to inform my master that there's a good show to watch. Master Song Feng didn't say anything for a while, but the black aura on his body kept surging as if it was brewing and he might attack Qin Shi in the next moment. His attention was focused on Qin Shi, so how could the three nascent soul cultivators let go of this opportunity? Ding Yuan shouted. She held the zither with one hand and held the strings with the other, then suddenly pulled and loosened it. The strings suddenly let out a buzzing sound, and the spiritual sound suddenly spread out. Feng Xiao turned his fingers and clasped the jade flute, then he brought it to his lips and blew it in a relaxed manner. The husband and wife, one attacking and one defending, one tightening and one loosening, cooperated seamlessly. Even though Master Song Feng was known as the #1 cultivator in the celestial pole, he didn't dare to look down on them. The black aura on his body became thicker and thicker, and it suddenly scattered like a drop of ink. The black aura on Master Song Feng's body was known as Primordial Devil Aura. If this Primordial Devil Aura danced, it would be like gales and thunder with amazing power. The Primordial Devil Aura scattered and condensed into a long saber that was about to chop the Yuan and Feng couple. But in an instant, the black long saber suddenly changed direction and chopped to the right side of the back. Ah, there was a scream. It was Daoist Ji who had just quietly hid behind Master Song Feng. Hearing Daoist Ji's scream, Qin Shi's first thought was that this person really wasn't mute. Then he thought that Master Song Feng was worthy of being a great cultivator in the late nascent soul stage. Even a bystander like him couldn't see through him. In the middle of a fight, Master Song Feng could actually beat him at his own game and create a diversion. Master Song Feng snorted. Stinky Taoist, do you really think no one noticed? A vicious expression instantly appeared on Daoist Ji's delicate and harmless face. He ignored the saber of devil aura that had sunk into his shoulder and suddenly flicked his hands. A tiny object flew towards Master Song Feng's face. Master Song Feng was about to dodge, but the two of them were too close. He didn't manage to dodge and was hit. As soon as this thing was thrown onto Master Song Feng's body, it immediately made a huge explosion. Ah! This time it was Master Song Feng's voice. This time it was Daoist Ji who sneered. He grabbed the saber of devil aura that had sunk into his shoulder, threw it away and said in a hoarse voice, "Old Song Feng, how does the sky explosion thunder taste?" The primordial devil aura on Master Song Feng's body seemed to have gathered and scattered, and he seemed to have suffered a heavy injury. Ding Yuan and Feng Xiao looked at each other and both attacked. Just as Master Song Feng was about to bear the heavy attack of the three nascent soul cultivators, a black shadow flashed. Master Song Feng instantly left his original spot and appeared in midair. The black aura around him condensed and solidified again. Ignorant children. Master Song Feng snorted coldly. Do you really think that I'll be at your mercy after taking this blow? At this time he was floating in midair, and his primordial devil aura didn't diminish at all. It seemed that he hadn't been injured at all. The three nascent soul cultivators were stunned, and a look of surprise appeared on their faces. Fellow Daoist Ji, Ding Yuan said in a low voice, "This is..." Daoist Ji was also in disbelief. The expression on his face kept changing. He stared at Master Song Feng and said, "Impossible, he's bluffing. Fellow Taoists, you know the power of the sky explosion thunder." This old man took it head-on. "I absolutely don't believe he's fine." Feng Zhao's expression changed for a while and then he said, "Fellow Daoist Ji is right. Sister Luan, don't be fooled by him." Hearing what her husband said, Ding Yuan no longer had any doubts. She put away her zither and was ready to go. Right at this moment, several flight lights suddenly flashed across the sky and came in their direction. The incoming people were also divided into two groups, coming from two different directions. Old Taoist fooling. Feng Xiao murmured as he looked at the group of people that gradually became clearer. Daoist Ji's expression darkened. More than 100 years ago, I had some conflicts with this old Taoist. I'm afraid he'll... Ding Yuan and Feng Xiao were silent. Old Taoist Fuling should actually be called Venerable Swordsman Fuling. He was one of the Venerable Swordsmen in Gujin sect. He entered the sect through Tao, so he always dressed like a secular Taoist, so they called him Old Taoist. Although they were all from the 7 great cultivation groups and would show some respect for each other because they were friends, it was hard to say when interests were at stake. At this time another group of people also flew closer. Daoist Ji frowned even more. Qin Jingha. Ding Yuan and Feng Xiao looked at each other with a mysterious look in their eyes. Logically speaking, Qin Jingha had a pretty good relationship with them, but the problem was that the reason they were fighting against Master Song Feng was because they wanted to fight over the treasure. With the treasure right in front of them, who knew whether or not they would try to snatch it by force? At this time, Feng Xiao secretly glanced at Qin Shi next to him, and Ding Yuan nodded secretly. Feng Xiao suddenly moved and instantly flashed to Qin Shi's side. He said with a smile, "Brat Qin, do us a favor." Although Qin Shi had been vigilant, Feng Xiao was a middle-stage nascent soul cultivator after all. He had just summoned the 3 young real fire sword when Feng Xiao's palm hit his head. Chapter 294. Old Feng. With a loud shout, Lord Daoist Jinghe sped up and rushed to Feng Xiao in an instant. With the Li-fire gourd hanging in front of him, he shouted angrily, "How dare you attack my disciple?" Before Feng Xiao could speak, Ding Wan said with a smile, "Brother Daoist Jinghe, don't worry. My husband was just joking with your boy." Joking? Lord Daoist Jinghe wasn't a slow-witted person. Looking at the scene in front of him, he roughly knew what happened, so his voice also slowed down. "That'll do. You husband and wife don't need to play any tricks. Since you protected him this time, consider it as me owing you a favor." Hearing this, Feng Xiao laughed and pointed with 2 fingers. A stream of spiritual aura poured into Qin Shi's shoulder well acupoint. Qin Shi, whose meridians were restricted, finally recovered and breathed a sigh of relief. He bowed to Feng Xiao without any disrespect. "Thank you, Senior Feng." Feng Xiao attacked him just now because he wanted to use him to restrain Lord Daoist Jinghe. Lord Daoist Jinghe was very tactful, so Feng Xiao and his wife chose to join hands with him. Qin Shi's mind was clear, so he was still respectful to Feng Xiao. There were many conflicts of interest between cultivators. Since his master chose to join hands with them, they were now companions, so he had no reason to be disrespectful to Feng Xiao. Feng Xiao nodded with a smile, but Ding Wan smiled sweetly at Lord Daoist Jinghe. "Brother Daoist Jinghe, I really like your boy's cleverness. Why don't you become my son-in-law? Although my Fingning is a bit spoiled, she's also a good girl." In just a few seconds, from checks and balances to joining hands to discussing marriage, old Daoist Fulling and the others who were flying in front hadn't arrived yet, but their topic had already changed. Qin Shi turned a deaf ear to this and walked back to Lord Daoist Jinghe. "Master." "En?" Seeing that he was alone, Lord Daoist Jinghe looked around. "Where's Tiange?" Qin Shi was worried about this matter. "I got separated from Tiange. Master, since you're here, I'll go find her." "Wait." Lord Daoist Jinghe raised his hand to stop them. With a frown he said, "Don't act rashly. This is the depths of a mortal's ruins. You shouldn't have come here. Since you're already here, just wait. Once I've dealt with the matter here, I'll go look for Tiange with you." "But..." Qin Shi only said 2 words. When he saw Lord Daoist Jinghe's expression, he could only sigh and obey. "Got it?" Of course, he knew that his master was right. There were so many nascent soul cultivators here, so it was clear that he had gone in the wrong direction in the fog and entered the depths of a mortal's ruins by mistake. At this time, it was not suitable for him to act alone. But when he thought about how Tiange was still in the fog and couldn't find her way, he felt extremely anxious. Lord Daoist Jinghe naturally understood Qin Shi's absent-minded look, but he didn't say anything to him. Instead, he answered Ding Wan's question, "It's too late. Your Fengning isn't bad, but unfortunately my boy already has a sweetheart." Ding Wan was a little surprised. She glanced at Qin Shi and joked, "What a pity. I wonder which family she's from?" "Ah, good things don't flow to outsiders. Unfortunately, she's my disciple." Before Lord Daoist Jinghe could finish his complacent words, he heard a gloomy voice. "The 3 of you are so impatient. It's only been a while, but you're already talking about marriage?" This voice belonged to Master Song Feng. His own disciple was killed by Qin Shi. Now that he saw Lord Daoist Jinghe and the Wan and Feng couple talking about their disciple and daughter, he felt extremely resentful. Ding Wan added fuel to the fire. She said with a smile, "Old Song Feng, you don't have a child. Are you jealous? If you have the time, you might as well give birth to a..." "Oh no, with your body that's neither human nor ghost nor monster, I'm afraid you can't give birth, right?" "You..." Master Song Feng suddenly became furious. His primordial devil aura surged and transformed into a long knife. During this time, the other nascent soul cultivators landed one after another, staring at Master Song Feng with hostile expressions. Gujian Sect's Old Daoist Fulling, Sword Venerable Xiao He, Individual Cultivator Qingming Wanderer, Xianqing School's Lord Daoist Huayan, Tiandao Sect's Daoist Haifeng Lu Dequan. Although these people were all in the early stage of the nascent soul realm except for Old Daoist Fulling, Lord Daoist Jinghe, Ding Wan, Feng Xiao, and Daoist Ji were all in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. Master Song Feng paused for a while, then snorted coldly. Without saying goodbye, he turned into a black cloud and left. The 10 nascent soul cultivators present all sighed with relief. They had a lot of people, so they weren't afraid of Master Song Feng, but this old man was a madman. If they really fought him, with his reputation as the #1 late-stage nascent soul cultivator in the celestial pole, even if they lost, they would lose a few people and they probably wouldn't be able to kill him. Now that he left on his own, it couldn't be better. As soon as Master Song Feng left, Old Taoist Fuling, who had just arrived, greeted them with a smile. Fellow Taoist Feng, fellow Taoist Ding, fellow Taoist Ji, fellow Taoist Jinghe, what are you doing? During the demonic beast riot, Yi Jingguan and Gujian sect had conflicts, so Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't have a good attitude towards Old Taoist Fuling. He just casually raised his hand at Old Taoist Fuling as a return greeting. Ding Wan smiled and said, fellow Taoist Fuling, long time no see. In fact, it's nothing. Fellow Taoist Ji and I just found something. Really? Old Taoist Fuling's eyes glinted, but under the smiles of Ding Wan and Feng Xiao, the glint quickly dissipated. He was still smiling. Fellow Taoists, rest assured. You and your wife are working together, so how could I intervene? I just want to broaden my horizons. You won't object, right? Ding Wan smiled and said slowly, what are you talking about, fellow Taoist Fuling? It's not a good thing. It's just a piece of Shen Fire Jade essence. I think it's useless to you. Oh. The light in Old Taoist Fuling's eyes went out. Shen Fire Jade essence was a good thing and a rare material for refining fire magic weapons, but he was a sword cultivator, so it was useless to him. On the contrary, Qin Shi next to Lord Taoist Jinghe brightened his eyes. As a middle-stage nascent soul cultivator, Ding Wan's eyes immediately fell on Qin Shi and she asked with a smile, Qin boy, are you interested in this Shen Fire Jade essence? Well, that's right. Both of you, master and disciple, practice fire magic. Although her words were kind, Ding Wan glanced at Lord Taoist Jinghe faintly, and her meaning was self-evident. Lord Taoist Jinghe snorted and said, you two don't need to test me. When have I ever gone back on my words? There were many intrigues among cultivators, but the higher the level of a cultivator, the more importance they attached to their promises. Once they made a promise, they generally wouldn't go back on it unless it involved great benefits. A piece of Shen Fire Jade essence met this standard, so Ding Wan and Feng Xiao both wanted to test Lord Taoist Jinghe. However, they also knew that although Qin Jinghe was annoying, he always kept his word. It was fine if he didn't know about the Shen Fire Jade essence, but he still said that after knowing it, so he certainly wouldn't compete with them. Among the 5 middle-stage nascent soul cultivators present, Old Taoist Fuling wasn't interested, Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't compete, and they were on the same side as Taoist Ji, so they naturally didn't pose any threat. Feng Xiao bowed to the others. Thank you, everyone. Then he winked at Taoist Ji. Taoist Ji nodded and jumped down from the crater. Taoist Ji went to get the Shen Fire Jade essence. Ding Wan looked around and saw a handsome young man in the foundation building realm behind Old Taoist Fuling, so she asked with a smile, fellow Taoist Fuling, when did you accept a new disciple? Old Taoist Fuling glanced at the young man behind him, stroked his beard and said with a smile, this little friend is not my disciple. Really? Ding Wan was a little surprised. When did you become so kind? If he's not your disciple, why did you bring him to Demonic Mountain? Haha. Old Taoist Fuling seemed to be in a good mood. It doesn't hurt to tell you, but fellow Taoist Ding, you and your wife can't compete with me. Feng Xiao smiled. What are you talking about, fellow Taoist Fuling? We already have a daughter. Do you think we'll take this little friend as our son-in-law? That's hard to say. Old Taoist Fuling smiled mysteriously. His expression was too mysterious, so the Wan and Feng couple as well as Lord Taoist Jinghe and the others couldn't help but release their divine senses to explore the young man. As soon as they did, their expressions changed. After a long time, Ding Wan murmured, pure yang constitution. Upon hearing these words, Qin Shi's expression suddenly changed and he couldn't help but look at the young man. Old Taoist Fuling smiled without saying anything, obviously very proud. He wasn't worried that others would compete with him. After all, pure yang constitution was only useful for female cultivators. Ding Wan was the only female cultivator present, and she already had a dual cultivation partner. Although they had a daughter, they loved her like a treasure, so they wouldn't casually find a human furnace for their daughter. Even if other people had female disciples, they had to think about the consequences of competing with him. A moment later, Feng Xiao said faintly, fellow Taoist Fuling, you're really lucky. Pure yang constitution is hard to find in 1,000 years. Are you going to give him to your disciple as a human furnace? Hearing the word human furnace, the young man was even more frightened. Old Taoist Fuling said with a smile, he's not a human furnace. This little friend has a good aptitude, so it's not a big deal to take him as a disciple. Really? Ding Wan wanted to say more, but Taoist Ji had already appeared at the crater, so she stopped talking. Taoist Ji glanced cautiously at the nascent soul cultivators in front of him and then gently threw the Shen Fire Jade essence in his hand. Although the nascent soul cultivators had no intention of snatching it, they didn't leave. Naturally, they were interested in the Shen Fire Jade essence. They wanted to see what the Shen Fire Jade essence that grew in Immortal's ruins looked like. At this moment, when they saw the Shen Fire Jade essence that Taoist Ji threw out, their eyes were fixed on it. Old Taoist Fulling's eyes flashed, and even Lord Taoist Jinghe was a bit tempted. The Shen Fire Jade essence was really too perfect. It was as big as 2 palms, fiery red, crystal clear and extremely pure. They had never seen such a Shen Fire Jade essence. Seniors. Qin Shi was the first to speak. The Wan and Feng couple and Taoist Ji stared at him vigilantly. Qin Shi said calmly, "Seniors, are you only interested in the Shen Fire Jade essence?" The 3 of them were stunned, but Ding Wan still said with a smile, "Brat Qin, what do you mean?" Qin Shi said, "Such a large piece of jade essence must have grown here for at least tens of thousands of years, so it's enough to grow a chalcedony. If there's a chalcedony, would you be willing to part with it? I'm willing to exchange it with other treasures." Chalcedony? Lord Taoist Jinghe was moved and his eyes were a bit eager. Yes, this jade essence looks so good. If it grows a chalcedony, it must be good. The 3 middle-stage nascent soul cultivators looked at each other. Chalcedony was rare, but it was nothing compared to this Shen Fire Jade essence. Ding Wan said, "So you want a chalcedony? If there's a chalcedony in this jade essence, I don't mind giving it to you." Qin Shi smiled and bowed to thank them. "Thank you, seniors." A trace of regret flashed in the eyes of old Taoist Fulling and the others. Now that they found the Shen Fire Jade essence was so outstanding, they were all greedy. If Qin Jinghe's group had a conflict with these 3 people, they could fish in troubled waters. Unfortunately, this Qin brat wanted a chalcedony, and Ding Wan gave him a favor, so it seemed they wouldn't fight. Thinking of this, old Taoist Fulling bowed to the others. "Since there's nothing else, we'll take our leave first. Fellow Taoists, I hope to see you again." Ding Wan and Feng Xiao were eager for them to leave, so they politely bowed back, but Lord Taoist Jinghe's group didn't pay any attention to them. Chapter 295. After old Taoist Fulling left, Feng Xiao took the Shen Fire Jade essence, pressed it with his fingers, explored it with his spiritual aura and said with a smile, "Brat Qin, you're lucky. There's really a chalcedony in this jade essence." "Really?" A happy expression appeared on Qin Shi's face. Feng Xiao exerted force on his fingers, and a crack appeared on the Shen Fire Jade essence. Water-like clear jade liquid flowed out and condensed into a transparent crystal as soon as it came into contact with the air. When the jade liquid flowed out, Feng Xiao threw the crystal in his palm to Qin Shi. "My wife said this chalcedony is for you." With such a pure color, this chalcedony was definitely more than 1,000 years old. Qin Shi took it and cupped his fists in delight. "Thank you, seniors. I'll remember your kindness." Ding Wan smiled. "You're not going to marry my Fengning. Why do you need to remember?" Although Qin Shi was experienced, he was a bit thin-skinned, so he just smiled and didn't answer Ding Wan's teasing. Lord Taoist Jinghe glanced at them and said, "You and your wife shouldn't bully my disciple. If there's nothing else, we'll leave." Although Lord Taoist Jinghe had said he wouldn't intervene, there were 4 nascent soul cultivators here, which added variables. The Wan and Feng couple and Taoist Ji were eager for him to leave, so no one was polite. Feng Xiao said, "In that case, I'll see you later." Lord Taoist Jinghe nodded and left with Qin Shi, Lord Taoist Huayan, Taoist Haifeng and the others. After flying out of the range of the 3 middle-stage nascent soul cultivators' divine senses, the group of 5 stopped, and Lord Taoist Jinghe asked, "Where did Tiange go missing?" Qin Shi pointed in a direction. "That way, about half a day's journey." Lord Taoist Jinghe looked at the direction he pointed and frowned. "You mean in the fog?" "Yes." "How long have you been separated? Was there anyone else with you? Does Tiange have any injuries? What happened? Tell me slowly." Lord Taoist Jinghe asked questions one by one. Qin Shi suppressed his anxiety and roughly described their situation in the past few days. Of course, he skipped the part that was inconvenient to say in public. When he talked about how they were separated, Lord Taoist Jinghe and the 3 nascent soul cultivators exchanged glances. The black-robed Taoist Haifeng, who looked like a demonic cultivator, said, "Qin family's kid, this is the first time we've encountered the fog you mentioned. Previously we spent quite a bit of effort to get out. We really don't have much confidence in searching there." This answer surprised Qin Shi. He looked at Lord Taoist. Lord Taoist Jinghe said, A cultivator who's just formed his gold core won't survive more than a few days in Immortal's ruins if he doesn't have any special means. Tienga is my disciple, I can't just leave her there alone. Daoist Dan didn't, Daoist Lu Dequan and Lu didn't, Daoist was my, she and didn'ts. Qin Master Jinghe, Daoist, Daoist sect. Fire and the Daoist, and Daoist. Daoist Feng and Lu Daoist Lu. The Qing Yang Dao Master. Luan? Daoist Jinghe said faintly, got it? Junior Martial Brother Huayan and I will be there in 2 days. If we don't arrive, you don't have to wait for us. Daoist Haifeng and Lu Dequan looked at each other, nodded and left in flight lights. When they disappeared, Lord Daoist Huayan, who had been silent, asked, Senior Martial Brother Jinghe, how are we going to find her? This problem gave Lord Daoist Jinghe a headache. They had all been through the fog and knew divine senses were useless in that place. Even though they were nascent soul cultivators, they had to be very careful. Brat. Lord Daoist Jinghe pointed at Qin Shi. Aren't you usually very capable? How could this happen when you took Tienga out? Qin Shi lowered his head and didn't say anything. He was indeed not cautious enough. He knew Immortal's ruins was full of danger, but he didn't prevent them from getting separated. Seeing him like this, Lord Daoist Jinghe felt he couldn't be blamed, so he said, there's no other way. Let's go find her. Junior Martial Brother Huayan, let's split up. You go to the east and I'll go to the west. We'll meet here in a day and a half whether we find her or not. Okay. Lord Daoist Huayan didn't say any nonsense. He directly dived down, turned into a flight light, and disappeared into the fog not far away. Watching Lord Daoist Huayan's figure disappear, Lord Daoist Jinghe stood for a while and suddenly said, tell me, did something happen between you and Tienga? Qin Shi was stunned. Realizing what his master was asking about, he coughed and looked away. Let's talk about it later. Seeing him like this, Lord Daoist Jinghe was greatly surprised. Brat, did you succeed? Qin Shi didn't answer, but even a blind man could see the joy in his eyes. Lord Daoist Jinghe wanted to laugh, but he felt unhappy because he didn't see it. His expression twisted for a while, but he had to pat Qin Shi's shoulder. Not bad. You didn't waste Master's kindness. Qin Shi was happy to think of this, but he was more worried about Tienga's safety. He said, Master, let's go find her first. If we're late, Tienga will be in more danger. Tienga was indeed in danger now. In the fog, a large group of gold wire rats appeared out of nowhere. Although their cultivation levels weren't high, there were a lot of them, and they appeared and disappeared unpredictably in the fog. Shi and Jing Xingji had been killing for a long time, but they still hadn't killed all of them. Tienga swallowed several regeneration pills and watched Xiaohua jumping up and down to force the demonic beast to retreat with spells. She gasped and said, Fellow Daoist Jing, we can't go on like this. Jing Xingji, who was controlling his flying sword to kill the enemies, rolled his eyes. I know that, but do you have a way? Tienga thought for a while and said, there's a way we can try. Even if it doesn't work, we can still take a break. The two of them had been killing for a long time without stopping. Although Jing Xingji still had spiritual aura in his body, he felt mentally exhausted, so he said, that's not bad. Tell me what you want to do. Tienga killed another group of demonic beasts and said, Fellow Daoist, you can block these demonic beasts for a while. Jing Xingji didn't say anything. The long sword in his hand suddenly burst with bright white light, enveloping the two people and the demonic beast. Although this person's character wasn't likable, there was no doubt about his strength. Under the sword light, none of the demonic beasts could cross the boundary. Tienga didn't waste any time. She touched her Qingkuan bag, took out formation-laying tools and spirit stones, and quickly laid a formation around the two of them. Jing Xingji glanced at her, feeling a bit surprised. The Tao of formations could be considered the most unorthodox of the unorthodox methods. Studying formations required a lot of time, and before reaching the nascent soul realm, every cultivator hated the fact that they had too little time to cultivate. They simply couldn't spend too much time studying unorthodox methods, so there were very few cultivators below the nascent soul realm who were proficient in formations. However, he didn't know that Tienga's situation was a bit special. When she was building her foundation, she was worried that her cultivation speed would be too fast, so she deliberately slowed down and spent a lot of time studying unorthodox methods, so her formations were much better than cultivators in the same realm as her. The formation in her hands now was the 4 symbols 100 flowers formation she modified. The 4 symbols were mainly for defense, while the 100 flowers were mainly for killing. It was a compound formation. However, it hadn't been long since she formed her gold core, so she didn't spend much time on formations. This set of formation-laying tools was prepared for her when she was building her foundation, so its power was limited. Just as she was laying the formation, Jing Xingji suddenly shouted, "Someone's coming." Emo Chenga was startled, then delighted. She hurriedly asked, "What's his cultivation level?" Her divine sense was injured, so it was even weaker than Jing Xingji's. The fog also blocked divine senses, so Jing Xingji sensed for a long time before he said with uncertainty, "He seems to be in the core formation realm." Core formation realm? Could it be? Before he could finish his words, a vague black-clothed figure appeared in the fog. As soon as this person appeared, the surrounding gold wire rats found a new target, and several hundred of them immediately turned around and rushed towards this person. Seeing this, Mo Chenga stopped laying the formation. She and Jing Xingji glanced at each other and each controlled the flying swords in their hands to kill that person. "Fellow Taoist," Jing Xingji said loudly, "I'm a cultivator from Gujin sect. May I ask your name?" In the fog, the black figure heard his voice and paused for a moment, but it didn't answer and continued to focus on killing. Mo Chenga squinted her eyes and asked hesitantly, "Look, isn't that a female cultivator?" Although the fog was hazy, the figure in black that appeared faintly was indeed graceful. Jing Xingji only took a glance then said, "It's a female cultivator." Hearing his affirmative answer, Mo Chenga was secretly disappointed. Although she knew Qinshi's cultivation level and methods were higher than hers and he was also very experienced, this was Demonic Mountain. She felt very uneasy after being separated from him for so long. "What should we do now?" Jing Xingji glanced around and said, "Let's go and take a look. The more people, the more assurance." Mo Chenga had no objection. As for female cultivators, few of them were ruthless, and the other party was also trapped in the same fog, so they should be able to form an alliance. The two of them manipulated their flying swords. Xiaohua spewed sun-real fire and attacked the direction of the black-clothed woman. The two of them were getting closer and closer, and they could clearly see the woman's appearance. She wore claw gloves and was fighting with demonic beasts. Unexpectedly, she was a martial cultivator. Jing Xingji's voice was filled with excitement. "She's a beauty?" Mo Chenga couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. This guy really changed. What kind of situation is this? He's still thinking about the other party being a beauty? Although she said that, Mo Chenga was still a bit curious. She looked at the woman's face and what she saw stunned her. She had a very delicate face. It wasn't very beautiful, but it had a kind of calm and cold beauty. Of course, this wasn't the reason she was surprised. What she found strange was that she looked a bit familiar. A delicate woman, a martial cultivator using claw gloves. Cultivators always had good memories. Mo Chenga slowly recalled such a person. She knew who this person was. She took a breath and said secretly, "Fellow Taoist Jing, this person is related to Master Song Feng." Jing Xingji paused and looked at her suspiciously. There was no one in Kunwu who didn't know about Master Song Feng. Jing Xingji naturally also knew about this Celestial Pole's #1 late nascent soul cultivator and his disreputable reputation. He said secretly, "Do you know her?" "I've seen her once." Mo Chenga stared at the female cultivator without blinking. Yes, more than 50 years ago, the female cultivator who appeared in Lord Taoist Xuanin's nascent soul ceremony and fought with her was this woman. Chapter 296. At Lord Taoist Xuanin's nascent soul ceremony, this woman was still in the late stage of the foundation building realm. After Master Song Feng appeared, she inexplicably disappeared. Mo Chenga didn't know what technique she used. Mo Chenga didn't expect to see her again more than 50 years later, and she had also advanced to the core formation realm. This wasn't strange. At that time, this woman was already in the late stage of the foundation building realm. If she was really Master Song Feng's disciple or grand disciple, it was normal for her to advance to the early stage of the core formation realm in 50 years. Mo Chenga herself was only in the middle stage of the foundation building realm at that time, but now she had also advanced to the core formation realm. She roughly told Jing Xingji what happened. Jing Xingji paused but didn't say anything. Although he liked beauties, his heart was ruthless. In comparison, he was even more ruthless than Qinshi. At least, if Qinshi promised to take someone with him, he wouldn't talk nonsense. Jing Xingji, on the other hand, kept fawning on her along the way but never truly regarded her as a partner. However, this woman was a core formation cultivator after all. In this situation, one more person was always good. Emo Chenga didn't know what decision Jing Xingji would make. Emo Chenga turned to look at the woman and found that her martial arts skills were much better than they were 50 years ago. Martial cultivators were the same as sword cultivators. They had to surpass ordinary cultivators in fights of magical power. The higher the cultivation level, the more terrifying this advantage was. Although this woman was only in the early stage of the core formation realm, judging from the power of her attacks, she wasn't weaker than ordinary middle-stage core formation cultivators, maybe even stronger. Emo Chenga's heart was also in turmoil. If she joined hands with this woman, she'd be a good help, but if she turned against her, in this fog, there were really dangers everywhere. After a while, Jing Xingji finally said via voice transmission, "If we can join hands with her, then let's do it." Emo Chenga nodded. In any case, she chose to believe Jing Xingji at this time. "Miss?" Jing Xingji said loudly, "I'm a cultivator from Gujian sect. May I ask if you're Master Song Feng's disciple?" As soon as he said that, the black-clothed figure paused, turned around, and glanced at the two of them warily. Jing Xingji smiled and said to her, "Miss, don't worry. We don't have any bad intentions. This fog is really strange. You and I are trapped here, so are you willing to join hands?" The woman stared at them for a while but didn't say anything. Jing Xingji continued, "There are dangers everywhere on Demonic Mountain. Although Miss is skilled and bold, you're riding alone in the end. Having an extra helper also means having an extra escape route." When he said that, Jing Xingji's expression was very sincere. The woman looked at him, then at Emo Chenga, who was resisting the gold wire rat's attacks behind him. Her vigilant expression slowly softened. Before she opened her mouth, she said in a low, hoarse voice, "What if we join hands?" Hearing this, Jing Xingji smiled and said, "Naturally, we'll join hands to protect ourselves and find a way out." Looking for a way out? The woman's lips curled into a smile, but it looked like she was mocking them. "Have you found a way out?" "No," Jing Xingji said frankly. "However, the three of us are safer than one." Emo Chenga had to admit that when Jing Xingji's expression was serious, he was indeed a bit charming. Under his gaze, this woman gradually became less callous. She said, "How can I trust you?" Jing Xingji said with a smile, "What's the benefit of killing you in this fog? Besides, since you can reach Immortal's ruins, you must have extraordinary skills. Even if you fall out with us, you must have a way to escape, right?" After he said that, the woman was lost in thought. In a flash, a group of gold wire rats in front of her suddenly attacked. With a flash of sword light, Jing Xingji's flying sword was like a waterfall. Wherever the sword light went, flesh and blood flew everywhere. The group of gold wire rats died on the spot. After the death of this group of gold wire rats, the other gold wire rats that besieged them also attacked. The three of them didn't dare to neglect and immediately worked together to kill these violent demonic beasts. Originally, Jing Xingji and Emo Chenga didn't have enough lethality because Emo Chenga didn't have a suitable magic weapon. However, this woman was a martial cultivator, so she killed demonic beasts much faster than ordinary cultivators. With the three of them working together, the number of gold wire rats gradually decreased. More than an hour later, all the gold wire rats were finally killed. The three of them working together to kill the demonic beasts was, in fact, an alliance. After killing, the three of them were so tired that Emo Chenga couldn't even stand steadily. Xiaohua simply lay down and stuck out his tongue. The three of them sat on the ground in different postures, gasping for breath. After a while they finally got their breath. Jing Xingji smiled at the woman and said, "Miss, may I know your name?" A hint of hesitation flashed in the woman's eyes and she answered, "Nye Wuxiang." Jing Xingji was stunned. "Wuxiang? Charming Wuxiang? Nikang Wuxiang?" No. Her expression was cold and emotionless. "It's called nothing and it's called Wuxiang." Jing Xingji had never heard such a name in his life, so he didn't know what to say for a moment. Wuxiang. This really didn't sound like a woman's name. After a long time he could only praise, "What a special name." The woman who called herself Nye Wuxiang showed a mocking smile on her face and didn't answer. "I'm Jing Xingji." Upon hearing Jing Xingji's self-introduction, Nye Wuxiang just nodded, then turned to Emo Chenga and said, "Fellow Taoist Emo, long time no see. Do you still remember me?" Emo Chenga nodded. She was neither affectionate nor distant, and she replied with the same indifference, "Of course I remember. Unfortunately, I didn't know fellow Taoist's name until today." Cultivators always had good memories, so it wasn't surprising that they remembered each other. However, Emo Chenga still had doubts in her heart. Back then, this woman was no different from ordinary cultivators. but today she had been using ventriloquism and her voice was also quite strange. From beginning to end, she hadn't opened her mouth to speak. Could it be that something had changed in the past 50 years? However, they originally didn't have any friendship. They could even be said to be enemies. Emo Chinga only thought about it in her heart and didn't ask. After a few simple words, the three of them staggered to recover their spiritual aura. After a while, Jing Xingji finished meditating and asked Nia Wuxiang, "Miss Nia, how long have you been here? Do you have any clues about how to get out?" Nia Wuxiang answered, "About a day. My divine sense is useless here, and I've lost all sense of direction. I haven't been able to find a way out." Her situation was similar to theirs. Jing Xingji turned to look at Emo Chinga and said, "We're the same." However, along the way, fellow Daoist Qingwei left a formation imprint. I wonder if you've noticed it? Were you the ones who drew that 8 trigrams formation? Nia Wuxiang frowned. Emo Chinga answered, "Yes. In that case, fellow Daoist Nia has encountered it along the way?" Nia Wuxiang nodded. "I've encountered it a few times. Unfortunately, I'm not very proficient in formations, so I don't know how to point to it." "A few times?" "We've been following the directions of the 8 trigrams formation. If fellow Daoist has encountered it several times, it means fellow Daoist has gone around several times." "I see." Nia Wuxiang was stunned. She then asked in a low voice, "So, fellow Daoists still have a way to get out?" Emo Chinga's expression was indifferent. "I'm not sure about that. Nobody knows how big this fog is, and we don't know whether our direction is correct. In this fog, even our divine senses can make mistakes, and formation diagrams aren't completely reliable." What she said wasn't false. Formation diagrams could only point to the direction, but they couldn't point to the correct path. Moreover, since this fog could affect divine senses, could it also affect other judgments? They didn't know. The three of them were silent for a while. Jing Xingji said, "Young Mrs., have you recovered your spiritual aura?" "I've recovered." With a small circulation inside her body, Emo Chinga recovered her spiritual aura very quickly. Nia Wuxiang also nodded. Jing Xingji said, "Then what do you think about the rest of our journey?" Emo Chinga didn't answer immediately. She turned to look at Nia Wuxiang. Nia Wuxiang lowered her head and also didn't answer. After a moment of silence, Jing Xingji said, "Ladies, this is related to our lives. If you have something to say, you'd better say it now." Right now he didn't have a smile on his face. Instead he looked at them seriously. "I have nothing to say." Emo Chinga was the first to speak. She said faintly, "To be frank, my strength is inferior to yours. I only know a little about formations, that's all. Using formation diagrams to point out the direction is the only way I can think of." Jing Xingji and Nia Wuxiang didn't answer. After a moment of silence, Nia Wuxiang's low and hoarse voice rang out. "Fellow Daoist, you have this 5th-rank spiritual beast, so your strength isn't weak. You're being too modest." Emo Chinga smiled. "I'm just speaking the truth. Spiritual beasts are too weak compared to cultivators. But fellow Daoist's magic weapon is also extraordinary." Nia Wuxiang raised her eyebrows and smiled. Her smile didn't seem to be a simple one. The previous few times, it was always filled with ridicule, but this time, it had a different meaning. Emo Chinga pretended she didn't see anything and smiled slightly. "Fellow Daoist Nia, you flatter me." Nia Wuxiang continued, "Fellow Daoist Emo, I heard your master and senior martial brother both came to Demonic Mountain? But why are you alone?" Emo Chinga glanced at her then said flatly, "They have another purpose." "Is that so?" Nia Wuxiang smiled again. This time, her smile finally had a charming feeling, but it seemed a bit gloomy. "Fellow Daoist Emo, you can't contact them, right?" Emo Chinga didn't move, but Jing Xingji's sword was unsheathed with a swish. The sword light approached Nia Wuxiang. Nia Wuxiang, however, didn't move. She raised her head and smiled at Jing Xingji. "Fellow Daoist Jing, what are you doing? You have nothing to do with Xianqing school, right?" Jing Xingji's gaze was as cold as ice. He said coldly, "I have even less to do with Master Song Feng." Nia Wuxiang still ignored the motionless flying sword hovering in front of her. She said, "I heard fellow Daoist Emo already has a Daoist name now. When I first met you several decades ago, I really didn't expect this day would come so quickly. Fellow Daoist is worthy of being Lord Daoist Jinghe's brilliant disciple." Emo Chinga sat still and replied, "Fellow Daoist Nia, you flatter me." To be honest, Nia Wuxiang stared at Emo Chinga, her expression gradually turning cold. "I'm not jealous of fellow Daoist Mo's talent, but I'm extremely jealous of fellow Daoist Mo's experiences." A disciple of a famous school, a nascent soul master, and he loves his disciple as much as his own life. Fellow Taoist's life is really good. By the end of her speech, Nie Wuxiang was no longer looking at Mo Tiange. Instead, she was smiling a bit absent-mindedly. Jing Xingji's expression changed. The sword light flashed and he withdrew. Fellow Taoist Nie, what do you mean by saying all this? Chapter 297. Nothing. Nie Wuxiang stood up, pulled on her gloves and said expressionlessly, I'm not like fellow Taoist Mo. Aside from brute force I have no other strong points. I'll listen to you two fellow Taoists on how to get out. After a while, Jing Xingji sheathed his sword and sat back down. I have an idea, but I don't know if fellow Taoists are willing to give it a try. Mo Tiange and Nie Wuxiang immediately turned to him. Jing Xingji said, it's easy to say but there's a certain risk. Mo Tiange said, we were just lucky to be trapped here. If we encounter any troublesome demonic beasts, how good can we be? If fellow Taoist Jing has an idea you might as well tell us. Nie Wuxiang also nodded expressionlessly and didn't object. Jing Xingji smiled and pointed above. Since we can't tell the direction we might as well fly up. There's always an end to this fog, right? Both Mo Tiange and Nie Wuxiang were stunned. Mo Tiange pondered for a moment then said, but fellow Taoist Jing, there's immortal aura above immortals' ruins. We don't have immortals' bodies so we can't stand immortal aura at all. What if we run into it? Jing Xingji said, this is the risk I'm talking about. This immortal aura shouldn't exist in the human world, so immortal aura has a repulsive effect on many things. This fog must be the same. I'm sure there's a gap between the fog and immortal aura. If we're lucky we can leave through this gap. Mo Tiange and Nie Wuxiang were lost in thought. They ruled out this method from the beginning because there was immortal aura above immortals' ruins. The powerful power in immortal aura was quite terrifying for cultivators like them. But Jing Xingji's words weren't unreasonable. They didn't know how long they could stay trapped in the fog like this. The group of gold wire rats just now were all below the 5th rank, but they were already so difficult to deal with. What if they encountered demonic beasts above the 5th rank? They might as well try their luck. Maybe they could really get out. Okay. Mo Tiange made up her mind. I think fellow Taoist Jing's idea is feasible. Nie Wuxiang also nodded. Her hoarse voice rang out, fellow Taoists, are the seniors of your sect nearby? Mo Tiange and Jing Xingji looked at each other and Jing Xingji said, fellow Taoist Nie, do you mean sending a message? That's right. Nie Wuxiang shifted her gaze between the two of them and said, of course, the two of you can also refuse. Perhaps the one who comes first will be my master at that time. Mo Tiange's eyes flickered, but she didn't say anything. From what Nie Wuxiang said, it seemed she was really Master Song Feng's disciple. Moreover, Master Song Feng also came to Demonic Mountain. This wasn't good news. Although Master Song Feng wasn't a good person, there was no doubt that he was strong. Furthermore, he had old grudges against both Lord Taoist Jinghe and Qin Shi. Qin Shi was in this. Not to Taoist Jingji Shen. Qin Master and in. Taoist Mo Sheng. Mo. With this thought in mind, Mo Tiange glanced at Jing Xingji. Wang Nye from. Wang, Wu from. Forget it. We don't have many thousand miles summoning talismans. Let's talk about it after we're sure we can get out. Mo Tiange was relieved. She was really worried Master Song Feng would come. The three of them did as they said. First of all, they had to find a suitable place to fly up. Core formation cultivators could fly high in the sky, but the fog here was unclear so they had to be careful. Second, they had to prepare defensive magic weapons and talismans for emergencies. Finally, the three of them were in trouble together, but they weren't of one mind, so they had to guard against others. Mo Tiange didn't dare to trust either of them. Nie Wuxiang was Master Song Feng's disciple, and Jing Xingji was ruthless. She couldn't trust either of them. She was the weakest among the three so they had to be careful. After a while, the three of them finally found a suitable place to fly up. This should also be a relic of the fight between immortals and demons in the distant past era. The neat rocks were cut off, exposing the horrible greenish-gray inside. After millions of years of weathering, they no longer had sharp edges, but they still retained their strange appearance. Jing Xingji flew several dozen feet up to check the situation. He then came down and said, let's do it here. It doesn't look abnormal. Mo Tiange also went up to take a look. Seeing nothing abnormal, she nodded in agreement. Nie Wuxiang, on the other hand, looked casual and didn't look at it carefully. The three of them then sat in meditation and rested, preparing magic weapons, talismans and the like. After a long time Jing Xingji asked, "Fellow Taoists, are you ready?" If he had the intention of seducing someone, he'd call them Miss. Now that he called them fellow Taoists, it was clear he'd changed his mind. Emo Chenga and Nye Wushang both nodded. Nye Wushang was a martial cultivator, so she didn't have much to prepare. Emo Chenga, on the other hand, had always been cautious and put her things in the most convenient places. That being the case, let's get started. Wait. Nye Wushang's voice rang out. The three of us go up together? Wouldn't it be more convenient to leave one person outside? Jing Xingji smiled. Among the three of us, who's more reassuring to stay down there? Nye Wushang and Emo Chenga were speechless. Indeed, the three of them didn't trust each other, so staying behind to look after each other was unnecessary. Something really happened up there, they could only blame it on their bad luck. The three of them silently took out their flying magic weapons, operated their protective spiritual aura and began to fly up. This process was very slow, very similar to the situation when they climbed tens of thousands of feet peak before. However, it was very likely that they would encounter immortal aura instead of devil aura, so they also had to carefully avoid it or use their protective spiritual aura to block it. The three of them flew higher and higher, getting farther and farther away from the ground. Emo Chenga looked down. She didn't know why, but she felt a bit restless. She was now a core formation cultivator, so her perception of the mandate of heaven was much stronger than before. This was indeed not a good sign. She looked at Jing Xingji and found that he was also looking at her with a frown. Her heart stirred. Just as she was about to ask him in secret, she suddenly felt her ankle being pulled down by someone. She didn't have time to think too much. Her flying sword flew out of her sleeve and flew close to her ankle. At the same time she looked down. With a single glance he was astonished. She originally thought it was one of the two people who sneak attacked her, but she didn't expect it to be a hand that stretched out from the rock wall. Emo Chenga had wandered in the cultivation world for many years, but this was the first time she encountered such a strange scene. She felt her scalp go numb and she was so shocked that she almost cut off her foot. In a flash, Jing Xingji grabbed her hand and slashed down with his flying sword. His flying sword was an ancient magic weapon that could be called the same as Qin Shi's three-young real fire sword. With one slash that rock hand was cut off. After being cut off, those rocks seemed to have lost their vitality and fell one after another. Emo Chenga didn't have time to breathe a sigh of relief. On the other side, Nye Wushang let out a soft cry and was also entangled by these rock hands. Immediately afterward, countless rock hands stretched out from the cliff they were facing and tried to grab them. The three of them fought with these rock hands. Jing Xingji was fine. His flying sword was very sharp, so these rocks couldn't withstand his slash. Nye Wushang was slightly more difficult to deal with. Her boxing gloves were covered with spikes. If it was something else, it wouldn't be able to withstand a single punch from her. However, these rocks weren't afraid of spikes at all, so she had to use more strength than usual to smash these rocks. Emo Chenga's situation was similar to Nye Wushang's. She didn't have many offensive magic weapons on her, and the water element jade bottle and the earth element stone seal weren't suitable for the current situation. Her remaining flying sword wasn't as good as Jing Xingji's, so it was very strenuous for her to slash them. Emo Chenga found that using the flying sword consumed her spiritual aura very quickly, so she quickly stopped. She released Xiaohua from her spiritual beast bag and let it stand on her shoulder. She then used the sun real fire to burn these rock hands, which finally made things a bit easier. After fighting for a while, the three of them finally escaped from the rock hands. They flew some distance away before they stopped and didn't dare to approach again. The three of them looked at each other, then Emo Chenga asked, "Fellow Taoists, what is this thing?" Nye Wushang shook her head with a pale face. Although she wasn't weak, these strange rocks were extremely hard, which happened to restrain her. Right now she was fighting a bit awkwardly. I've never encountered such a strange thing. How can rocks be like living things? Jing Xingji waved his hand, surrounding himself with sword lights. He said, I also don't know. However, it's not surprising that there are strange things on Demonic Mountain. That was true. The world was so big that nothing was too strange, let alone a strange place like Demonic Mountain. The environment here was different from the human world. Perhaps the rules of the human world simply didn't apply here. The three of them were silent for a while. In the end, Nye Wushang said, forget it. It's not the time to look into this. Since we've already flown here, let's continue. Emo Chenga nodded in agreement. I have no objection. What about fellow Taoist Jing? And Jing Xingji answered. Compared to them he was the most relaxed. Although he had been fighting for a while, he almost didn't lose any spiritual aura. After being attacked by the rock hands, the three of them became even more cautious. Flying high in the sky full of gales, restrictions, and immortal aura wasn't safe. After flying for a while they reached the end of the cliff they climbed. Emochenga took a look and found that there were a lot of pink ball-like flowers growing on the hilltop, which looked very familiar. After looking for a while, she suddenly let out a cry of surprise and pointed at those pink ball-like flowers. Fellow Taoists, look. Are those the heavenly fragrant flowers that grow heavenly aromatic beans? Nie Wuxiang only glanced at them then looked away with disinterest. I'm not proficient in spiritual plants so I can't recognize them. Jing Xingji looked at her with a somewhat strange expression then nodded. Probably. Heavenly aromatic herbs aren't very rare on Demonic Mountain. I once heard people talk about them and they indeed look very similar. Upon hearing his affirmation, Emochenga hesitated for a moment but in the end she still gave up. Forget it. She absolutely didn't dare to take any more risks after what happened just now. At worst she'd just buy some heavenly aromatic beans when they got out. Chapter 298. As the three of them flew up, the fog became thinner and the immortal aura got closer and closer. Seeing that the immortal aura formed by the fallen immortals was right in front of them, the three of them couldn't help but stop. At that moment even Jing Xingji looked hesitant. They guessed that there was a gap between the immortal aura and the fog. Now the immortal aura was right in front of them, but the fog hadn't reached its end. No one knew whether they would explode because of touching the immortal aura if they flew up again. What should they do next? Fellow Taoist Jing. Before Emochenga could finish speaking, Jing Xingji flew up again. Emochenga and Nie Wuxiang glanced at each other and eventually followed him. The fog became thinner and thinner, and the immortal aura around them also became more and more abundant. The three of them had to spend more time blocking the immortal aura. This process was very complicated. They constantly consumed and replenished their spiritual aura. Emochenga occasionally looked down and saw that the mountain below had become a small dot. After a long time she heard Jing Xingji call out in surprise, "Fellow Taoists, look!" Emochenga looked up and saw that above the thin fog, there was a light without any obstruction. They finally rushed out of the fog. The three of them felt like they were reborn. They were trapped in the fog for just over a day, but the feeling that they couldn't get rid of the fog no matter where they went made them feel like it was a long time. After a moment of silence, Jing Xingji said, "Fellow Taoists, we're out of the fog. The most dangerous moment is below us. Don't lower your guard." Emochenga and Nie Wuxiang regained their senses and nodded. They both had quiet personalities, which was something Jing Xingji was very glad about. He liked women, but he hated others who held him back when he was in danger. Fortunately, these two didn't have bad tempers. The immortal aura was very close to them so they had to be very careful every time they flew. Fortunately, they were out of the fog and could clearly distinguish the direction. 10,000 feet peak was to their south, but there was a big volcano to their north, so they chose the west as their escape route. About half a day later, the three of them got out of the fog without danger and descended to the ground. Emochenga finally breathed a sigh of relief. She was always on edge when she was with these two, but now it was finally over. Fellow Taoists. As soon as she landed, Nie Wuxiang's gaze rested on the two of them for a moment before she said, "Since we're out of the fog, I'll take my leave now." Jing Xingji smiled and said, "Why is fellow Taoist Nie in such a hurry? Although we're out of the fog, this is the Immortals' ruins. There are still dangers everywhere." The corners of Nie Wuxiang's mouth curled up, revealing a somewhat mocking smile. "Fellow Taoist Jing, just take it that I'm a coward. If I'm not careful and run into your masters, I don't want this life of mine." After she finished speaking, she activated her flying magic weapon, turned around and left without saying anything. Emochenga stared at her back and sighed inwardly. Putting aside the fact that she was Master Songfeng's disciple, Nie Wuxiang wasn't annoying. Unfortunately, she was still Master Songfeng's disciple. After a moment of silence, Jing Xingji said, "Let's go." However, Emochenga didn't move. When Jing Xingji turned around she said, "Fellow Taoist Jing, I still have to find Senior Martial Brother Shoujing. May I know where you're going?" Jing Xingji raised his eyebrows and asked, "Do you want to part ways with me?" "If fellow Taoist Jing has another purpose, then yes." Emochenga said bluntly, "For me, the most important thing is to find Senior Martial Brother Shoujing, so I can't go somewhere else with fellow Taoist Jing first." "Fellow Taoist Jing?" Jing Xingji didn't say anything, but he also didn't leave. After a long time, Mo Chenga called him again when she didn't get an answer from him. Jing Xingji smiled then suddenly sighed. Qin Shoujing, his life is really good. Not long ago Nie Wuxiang said this to her, and now Jing Xingji also said the same thing to her. Mo Chenga had a feeling that this was absurd. In fact, cultivation was about not believing in fate. Since ancient times, how many people had ascended to immortality and become immortals? Since the separation of immortals and devils, there were only a few who entered the deification realm, let alone becoming immortals. Nevertheless, for hundreds of thousands of years, countless cultivators still rushed to enter this cruel cultivation world. They didn't believe in fate that they couldn't ascend to immortality. But now both Nie Wuxiang and Jing Xingji said the same thing. Was his life good? Maybe Qin Shi's life was very smooth, but everything he had today definitely wasn't just because his life was good. Maybe she was the same. Although she wandered from place to place before she was 20, she gradually had everything after she turned 20. But these things also didn't fall from the sky. Whether it was Jing Xingji or Nie Wuxiang, both of them presumably understood these principles, but they both said the same thing. There could only be one explanation: they had too many sad stories in their hearts. Mo Chenga wasn't a talkative person, and she also wasn't interested in prying into other people's privacy, so she didn't answer and asked, "Where does fellow Taoist Jing want to go?" In an instant, Jing Xingji's expression returned to its previous frivolous expression. He said indifferently, "If I want to find Qin Shoujing, then I'll go. This is Immortal's ruins and it's always dangerous to go alone." She didn't know whether he was referring to himself or her by danger. A thought flashed through Mo Chenga's mind, then she said, "All right. In that case, thank you for your kindness, fellow Taoist Jing." Jing Xingji waved his hand, not caring at all. Mo Chenga thought for a moment, then tried to send a summoning talisman. This time, the summoning talisman was sent out, but it fell as soon as it entered the fog. "It seems Qin Shoujing is still in the fog. You'd better not waste the summoning talisman," Jing Xingji said. Mo Chenga regretfully watched the summoning talisman fall to the ground and burn to ashes. She was a bit disheartened. "Do I have to go back?" Jing Xingji thought for a moment, then asked, "Don't you have any other methods of communication?" This reminded Mo Chenga. It wasn't that there weren't other methods of communication, but they weren't as effective as the summoning talisman. Anyway, she didn't have any other methods, so she could give it a try. She took out a jade box from her robe and opened it. Inside were several yellow wax-like objects. They were amber. Qin Shi gave them to her in Kuanzhong City. He said they would emit a strange fragrance after they were burned. As long as they weren't far away, he could smell them. She didn't care at that time, but she didn't expect to use them now. Jing Xingji was stunned when he saw them. He said, "He actually gave them to you?" Mo Chenga looked up and glanced at Jing Xingji. "Fellow Taoist Jing, do you recognize them?" Jing Xingji didn't answer but asked, "Do you know how I met Qin Shoujing?" "I know a little." Jing Xingji smiled then sighed. Back then he didn't even have a Taoist name. In a flash, so many years have passed. Qin Shoujing's name has spread throughout Kunwu, but only a few people know his real name. Mo Chenga didn't answer. That was an era very far away from her. At that time she didn't exist in this world. Jing Xingji sighed with emotion for a while, then said, "This thing was obtained from an ancient immortal's abode when we first met. Although it's not very useful, there should only be a few pieces in this world in his hands. Using this to communicate is a good method. This kind of fragrance is very special. If he really got lost, it might be able to guide him out. Moreover, it won't easily attract other people's attention." Upon receiving Jing Xingji's affirmation, Mo Chenga smiled. If that's really the case, that'd be the best. Then, just in case, the two of them flew a certain distance in silence. After making sure there was no one around, they sat down and burned the amber. As the flames burned, a strange fragrance they'd never smelled before slowly drifted away. Next they could only wait. Not long after, maybe only about 2 hours, Jing Xingji suddenly moved and stood up. "Someone's coming." Mo Chenga spread her divine sense but was stunned. A powerful spiritual aura fluctuation came from the sky. It was definitely not Qin Shi but a nascent soul cultivator. The two of them glanced at each other. Jing Xingji only had time to say, "Late-stage nascent soul?" A powerful spiritual aura pressure came down from above. A black cloud floated over. Mo Chenga looked up and saw that familiar black cloud. Her expression froze. "Master Song Feng. It's them?" An arrogant hoarse voice came from the black cloud. Next to the black cloud, Nie Wuxiang's indifferent expression swept over Jing Xingji and Emo Tiange. Yes, master. Although Master Songfeng's body was hidden in the black cloud, Emo Tiange could still feel his malicious gaze sweeping over her and Jing Xingji's clothes. She didn't change out of Xianqing School's Taoist robes on this trip, so she couldn't avoid it now. They'd cautiously left the place where they parted ways with Nie Wuxiang, but they were still easily found. Emo Tiange felt a chill rising from her heart. She'd lived for more than 80 years and cultivated until she reached the core formation realm. She'd encountered many dangerous situations and experienced many life-or-death crises, but she'd never been as nervous as she was now. The #1 cultivator in the celestial pole, the #1 person in the late stage of the nascent soul realm, in front of Master Song Feng, even if she was already in the core formation realm, she was still like an aura-refining cultivator, vulnerable at the first blow. She closed her eyes and silently ran the soul-refining art. Only then did she calm down under Master Song Feng's spiritual aura pressure. At this time Jing Xingji gave her a meaningful look. Emo Tiange could see he was telling her not to act rashly. Master Song Feng's lazy voice came from the black cloud. Girl, are you the disciple of that old man Qin Jinghe? Emo Tiange's expression didn't change. She didn't even have to salute and answered calmly, yes, senior is Master Song Feng? Master Song Feng's voice was slightly surprised. Qin Jinghe taught his disciples well. Ma Xianin and Qin Shoujing aren't bad. Girl, your cultivation level isn't good, but you're quite courageous. Emo Tiange curled up the corners of her mouth and forced a smile. Thank you for your praise, Senior. But Senior definitely didn't come here to praise Junior, right? Junior is timid. How about Senior give Junior a quick death? Upon hearing what she said, a low hoarse laugh came from the black cloud. Master Song Feng said, Girl, you're quite interesting. You're much more pleasing to the eye than that old man Qin Jinghe. But it's a pity that you have a master like Qin Jinghe and a senior martial brother like Qin Shoujing. You can only consider yourself unlucky to run into my hands today. Presumably, venerable swordsman Yuanying of Gujian sect wouldn't seek revenge on Master Song Feng for a core formation junior, no matter how talented the junior was. Jing Xingji's heart was incomparably clear. Hearing those words, he clenched his fists tightly, but in the end he did not say anything. Master Song Feng's invisible gaze once again fell on Emo Tiange. Although this late-stage nascent soul cultivator in front of her didn't have a physical body, Emo Tiange could clearly feel his might. Senior. Under this kind of pressure, she chose to speak first. What advice does Senior have for me? How could I dare to give advice to Qin Jinghe's disciple? Master Song Feng said sarcastically. Soon after, he said proudly, You don't need to take chances. I just happened to run into Qin Jinghe and the others. Your master clearly told others that Qin Shoujing already has a sweetheart who's also his disciple. That Qin Shoujing also said he got separated from you here and was very anxious. Presumably, aside from you, there can't be anyone else in his heart, right? Upon hearing what Master Song Feng said, Emo Tiange's heart was filled with joy. In that case, senior martial brother Shoujing had already met up with Master? Then she could rest assured. With Master here, senior martial brother Shoujing would definitely be fine. Thinking up to this point, although the current situation was still a dead end for her, Emo Tiange's mood became better. She smiled and said to Master Song Feng, Since I've fallen into Senior's hands, Junior has nothing to say. I wonder how Senior will deal with Junior? Her abnormally relaxed attitude made Master Song Feng a bit puzzled. Aren't you afraid? What if I'm afraid? Emo Tiange said faintly, Will Senior let me go if I'm afraid? Junior has never done this kind of thing, that's a waste of energy. The black cloud was quiet for a while, but Master Song Feng's laughter came from inside. Haha, you're really interesting, little girl. What a pity, what a pity. You just had to be that old fool Qin Jinghe's disciple. His voice turned cold and he said with an evil smile, Qin Jinghe's last disciple, Qin Shoujing's sweetheart. God is really on my side. If I kill you, those two people will definitely be in so much pain that they'll wish they were dead, right? Master Song Feng's gloomy voice sent a chill down Emo Tiange's back. She composed herself and said, Senior thinks too highly of me. Junior's master and senior martial brother are both people with very firm Tao hearts. If Junior dies an unnatural death, maybe they'll be sad for a while, but for cultivators the most important thing is still the path to immortality. Nothing will change. What she said wasn't just an excuse, it was also what she really thought. If she died, her master and senior martial brother Shoujing would naturally be sad for her. However, they were all cultivators, and for cultivators, what could be more important than the great Tao? No matter how sad something was, it would pass. Only the great Tao was the supreme pursuit. Thinking up to this point, Mo Chenga suddenly felt a bit depressed. She couldn't help but laugh at herself. Could it be that after confessing her feelings she also became sentimental? What was so strange about that? They were cultivators. For cultivators there might be unforgettable feelings, but they wouldn't be in so much pain that they'd wish they were dead. Master. Nie Wuxiang, who was standing next to the black cloud, suddenly spoke. She stared at Mo Chenga and said, Master, if you want to kill her, can you let disciple do it? Fellow Taoist Nye. Jing Xingji couldn't help but say, you. Nie Wuxiang's gaze swept over them, but it didn't linger on Jing Xingji. She only looked respectfully at the black cloud. After a while, Master Song Feng's voice came from the black cloud. Do you want to compete with her? Nie Wuxiang said faintly, Disciple didn't defeat her several decades ago, so I'm not convinced. I hope Master can help me. Mo Chenga couldn't help but glance at Nie Wuxiang. Her expression was very calm. Mo Chenga couldn't tell whether she wanted to help her or not. However, if Master Song Feng agreed to this matter, it would definitely be beneficial to her. Although Nie Wuxiang was formidable, it wouldn't be a problem for her to hold on for less than an hour. At that time, Master Song Feng's cold humph interrupted her thoughts, but she heard him say, Who said I wanted to kill her? What he said stunned Mo Chenga and the other two. Nie Wuxiang was even more stunned for a while. She then said with some uncertainty, Master, don't kill her? As soon as she finished speaking, another gust of strong wind swept past, leaving another red mark on her fair cheeks. Master Song Feng's impatient voice rang out. You dare to guess this old man's thoughts? Nie Wuxiang shut her mouth, lowered her head and said nothing. This master and disciple really didn't look like master and disciple. Nie Wuxiang's respect towards Master Song Feng was more of fear, and Master Song Feng didn't cherish Nie Wuxiang at all. It could even be said that even a servant wouldn't lower himself to this extent, let alone a disciple. Mo Chenga suddenly understood what Nie Wuxiang said when they met. With such a master, it was no wonder she envied her good life. In comparison, her life was indeed much better. Master had never said a harsh word to her and was always considerate of her. Mo Chenga didn't hate Nie Wuxiang because they were originally on opposite sides, so it was normal for Nie Wuxiang to turn around and tell her master about her whereabouts. Of course, she didn't love Nie Wuxiang because Nie Wuxiang was her enemy. Mo Chenga wasn't a person who would waste her sympathy casually. Now, seeing Nie Wuxiang without the slightest dignity in front of Master Song Feng, Mo Chenga only felt it was a pity. It was a pity that this rather proud woman was actually Master Song Feng's disciple. Kill her? Of course, if I do that, Qin Jinghe and Qin Shoujing will definitely be in a lot of pain. But it doesn't seem that interesting. And I have to think about how to deal with this little girl. I got it. The voice in the black cloud suddenly became very strange. It sounded complacent, but it also made people's hair stand on end. Mo Chenga felt a powerful spiritual aura pressure covering her body, making her unable to move. A wave of fear that made her shiver suddenly enveloped her whole body. Little girl, you're actually quite good looking, the voice in the black cloud said. Mo Chenga suddenly thought of a possibility. Cold sweat instantly broke out on her body. It couldn't really be like what I thought, right? Tsk. The black cloud swayed. The voice was so soft that it made people's hair stand on end. Little girl, if you want to blame someone, blame your senior martial brother Shoujing. Who told you to be so coincidentally loved by him? I really want to see how he'll feel after the woman he loves loses her virginity. Ah. Qin Shoujing, you killed my disciple, so I'll let you have a taste of what it's like to eat a fly. Ah. Mo Chenga finally heard this affirmation. She felt her brain go numb in an instant and she almost lost her mind. In that instant, countless thoughts flashed through her mind. In the end she blurted out, You're just a late-stage nascent soul cultivator, yet you actually want to do such a despicable thing? Despicable? Master Song Feng's voice was cold. Little girl, in this cultivation world where the weak are prey to the strong, could it be that there's still such a noble thing? Be that as it may, Senior's way of thinking is a bit too filthy. The one who spoke was Jing Xingji. His expression was extremely unsightly. Senior did such a thing to a junior. Aren't you afraid of being ridiculed by the cultivation world? Ha 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 ha. Master Song Feng laughed. Why would I be afraid of being ridiculed? Brat, can't you tell? You're the one who should be worried. Jing Xingji was dumbfounded. What do you mean? Umph. Master Song Feng disdained to answer. The black cloud surged and a strong wind suddenly rose around Emo Chenga and Jing Xingji, carrying a bitingly cold aura oppressing them. Emo Chenga couldn't care about anything else. She instantly summoned the white silk handkerchief to protect her body. Then she pressed the space between her eyebrows, wanting to enter the virtual sky world. She wasn't someone who couldn't keep her cool, but Master Song Feng's words had already made her lose her mind. This kind of thing was too disgusting. However, in front of a late-stage nascent soul cultivator, how could she make it in time? She felt her whole body go numb and in an instant she lost consciousness. Chapter 300. Master. Inside the fog, Qin suddenly stopped and frowned. What's wrong? Lord Daoist Jinghe asked casually. Qin sniffed the smell in the air and said, Tiange, might be sending a message. Lord Daoist Jinghe tilted his head. Qin sniffed again and finally nodded with certainty. Yes, it's Tiange. Hearing his certainty, Lord Daoist Jinghe asked curiously, Is there any special communication method between you and Tiange? Qin said, sort of. I didn't expect to use it at that time. Master, follow this smell. Tiange must be there. Lord Daoist Jinghe also sniffed. The smell in the air was very similar to the smell of flowers and plants. If he didn't pay attention he might think it was the smell of nearby flowers and plants, but if he smelled it carefully, it seemed very unique. Since this guy was so sure, it must be his personal property. Following this smell, the two of them walked forward slowly. At first they had to take their time to distinguish the smell, but as the smell became stronger they walked faster and faster. The fog gradually faded and in the blink of an eye, the two of them left the fog. Lord Daoist Jinghe said in surprise, This girl, she came out a long time ago. Qin was also very happy to see this. She's always been smart. I wonder what method she thought of. As they spoke the two of them stopped. This was the place with the strongest smell. At the same time, Qin also found a pile of black ash on the ground, proving that the smell really came from here. But the strange thing was there was no one around. He spread his divine sense, but there was no one within dozens of miles. Master? Qin was puzzled. Did you find anyone around? Lord Daoist Jinghe shook his head. No. The divine sense of a nascent soul cultivator covered a large area, but there was no spiritual aura fluctuation of cultivators as far as his divine sense could reach. Lord Daoist Jinghe turned to look in the direction they came from and said, Could it be that she went inside again? Probably not. Qin frowned. Tiange has always been steady. Since she sent a message here, she should be waiting for us here unless it's been too long or something happened. Something happened. Lord Daoist Jinghe looked solemn. His eyes swept the surrounding scenery like lightning, and his expression suddenly changed. Not good. What's wrong? Qin asked anxiously, Master, what did you see? Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't answer right away. With a wave of his sleeve, a wisp of faint red spiritual aura filled the air and shrouded the surroundings. Gradually, a bit of black appeared in the faint red. Qin's expression also changed. This is demonic qi. Lord Daoist Jinghe frowned. There's no devil aura at all in Immortal's ruins. This devil aura is also very different from the devil aura on Demonic Mountain. I've only seen this kind of devil aura on one person. Qin didn't need to say anything because he already knew. He muttered, Master Song Feng, yes. Lord Daoist Jinghe's expression darkened. Master Song Feng was here. Qin's complexion turned even paler. He almost didn't dare to imagine what had happened. Master Song Feng had been here but Emo Tiange wasn't there. She was in the early stage of the core formation realm, the #1 cultivator in the celestial pole. Don't worry. Lord Daoist Jinghe comforted him and took something out of his robe. It was a very small lamp, only the size of a palm. The light inside the lampshade was very bright. This was Emo Tiange's natal primordial spirit lamp. Lord Daoist Jinghe asked her for her blood essence to make it. As long as she was alive, this lamp would always be on. Seeing that the lamp was bright, Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled. You see, her natal lamp is fine, so she must be fine. There's no trace of fighting around, so maybe Tiange has already escaped. Right. Qin nodded. After taking a deep breath, he pulled himself together. Master, let's look for her again. Maybe Tiange was taken away by Master Song Feng, or maybe she's smart and ran away. Although the latter possibility was very low, It wasn't completely impossible. The fact that her natal lamp was so bright showed that she was still in good condition, which was a good thing. There were no traces of fighting around, so maybe Master Song Feng just took her away. Lord Daoist Jinghe was gratified to see that Qin Shi could still maintain his composure and didn't panic. Since it was Tiange who sent the message, can we follow this smell to find her again? Qin Shi thought for a moment. We can try. He got this amber when he got the Yang spiritual bead years ago. It was an ancient object and he didn't know its use at first. Once he accidentally burned it with real fire and found that its smell was special and could spread very far, so he thought it could be used to send messages. When he gave it to Tiange, he didn't think too much. He just thought the amber was very beautiful and rare in the world, so he wanted to please her. Unexpectedly, Tiange didn't pay attention to the amber among the pile of things, which made him feel lost for a long time. Now the amber actually came in handy, which was a pleasant surprise. It was much more difficult to follow the smell to find her again. The smell was getting fainter and fainter, and it was difficult to distinguish it. They kept looking and kept looking back. As time passed, Mo Chinga's natal lamp seemed to show signs of weakening, so they couldn't help but become more and more anxious. The most terrible thing was that no matter how they looked, the most likely place for Chinga to go was still in the fog. When the appointed time with Lord Daoist Huayan came, they still couldn't find Mo Chinga. Lord Daoist Jinghe had no choice but to send a message to Lord Daoist Huayan to find her together. In that case, if they met Master Song Feng, they might have a chance. Lord Daoist Huayan didn't have any objection. Mo Chinga wasn't an ordinary disciple. With her talent, she would definitely become the pillar of the new generation of Shenqing school in 100 years. As a Lord Daoist of the nascent soul realm, he should consider the interests of the school. However, they didn't have much time. The two Lord Daoists and the two nascent soul cultivators of Tiandao sect had an appointment to go to Jade Palace in Immortal's ruins. There was still half a day before their meeting. If they missed it, it would be hard to explain. Soon after, the three of them met, and Lord Daoist Huayan asked, "Senior Martial Brother Jinghe, what's going on? Why was Qingwei taken by Master Song Feng?" Lord Daoist Jinghe said, "We'll talk about it later. Junior Martial Brother Huayan, we don't have much time. Let's go find her first." Lord Daoist Huayan nodded and said, "Okay." Lord Daoist Jinghe and Lord Daoist Huayan each took out their flying magic weapons and disappeared into the fog in the blink of an eye. Mo Chinga felt like she was dreaming, a bizarre and painful dream. "Master." She heard a familiar voice with some anxiety. Isn't this too?" With a heavy bang, an old hoarse voice said angrily, "What? Do you sympathize with her?" "I don't dare." "Umph. Since you don't dare do it?" "Yes." Then she heard light footsteps, then she was helped up and something was stuffed into her mouth. It was some bean-like things. She was afraid instinctively that she shouldn't swallow these things. She was worried that this person would force her to swallow them, but this person just lifted her chin and put one hand on her throat. Those things didn't slide in. But as time went by, the things in her mouth seemed to ooze juice and slowly flowed down her throat. Then she felt that her remaining rationality was gone. Her whole body became hot, as if she was melting in the flames. The three of them flew back and forth for a long time. The smell became fainter and fainter, but they still couldn't find Mo Chinga. Qin Shi was very anxious. He knew it was very important for Master and Martial Uncle Huayan to go to Jade Palace. If they couldn't find Mo Chinga when the time was up, Martial Uncle Huayan wouldn't be willing to waste time. The longer they waited, the more dangerous it would be for Mo Chinga. "Master." He turned around and only said one sentence, but Lord Daoist Jinghe raised his hand to stop him. Lord Daoist Jinghe was also very anxious. The matter of Jade Palace was related to his chance to advance to the late stage of the nascent soul realm, but he also valued Mo Chinga's life. He didn't want to give up either. But when the time was up, he had to give up one of them. Lord Daoist Jinghe's expression changed for a long time. Finally, he made up his mind and said, "It's too late. This is the only way." For a moment, Qin Shi didn't know what Lord Daoist Jinghe meant. Lord Daoist Huayan's expression changed when he saw Lord Daoist Jinghe taking out a natal lamp from his bosom. "Senior Martial Brother, this will affect your strength." Lord Daoist Jinghe was unmoved. He said faintly, "I can still afford to lose this bit of strength. Junior Martial Brother Huayan, you don't need to say more." After that, he pressed the space between his eyebrows and was about to cast a spell. "Master." However, it was Qin Shi who stopped him. He reached out to cover the natal lamp, which was still lit but a bit weaker than before. He knew what Master wanted to do. The fog blocked divine sense, but the connection between blood essence couldn't be stopped, so Master wanted to force his own blood essence to sense Emochenga's location. That was absolutely impossible. Every cultivator knew the importance of blood essence. If it was lost, his strength would decline a bit. Normally he could recover it with some time. However, the place Lord Daoist Jinghe was going to was not a small matter. There were many nascent soul cultivators. If he lost some of his strength, his chances of survival would be lower. She took a deep breath, and a resolute expression appeared on his face. Master, let me do it. You? Lord Daoist Jinghe paused. I might not be able to take you with me later. If you lose your strength, what will you do in Immortal's ruins? She smiled and said confidently, Master, don't you trust me? More than 80 years ago, I was only in the middle stage of the core formation realm, but I still survived in Immortal's ruins, let alone now. Lord Daoist Jinghe looked pensive, but in the end he nodded. All right, if you have something to do, find a safe place to hide and send a message to Master. Don't take too many risks. Master, you're still worried about me? She smiled. He took Emochenga's natal primordial spirit lamp from Lord Daoist Jinghe, pressed the space between his eyebrows and began to cast a spell. A spiritual light appeared between his eyebrows. Soon after, a drop of dark red blood essence was forced out of the space between his eyebrows. She carefully guided this drop of blood essence to fly towards the natal lamp, merging it with the blood essence hidden deep inside. In an instant, a strange feeling appeared in his mind. In a hazy state, everything around him seemed to be far away, but some other things were extremely clear. The natal primordial spirit lamp swayed, and its light seemed to be a bit weaker. After a moment of confusion, she became sober again, and he had a clear direction. This way. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.